I'll go ahead and kick it off. I'll hand it over to Paige Humble, our Executive Director, to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jenny. And as Jenny's, per her polling question, and I'm sharing my screen with all of you now, per her polling question, there are a lot of virtual events, but this one is so important, and it was really important to us to be able to convene everyone, for this discussion. So I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about who we are as an organization, if this is the first time that you've participated in something with Lung Cancer Initiative, and then to walk you through what we're going to be doing throughout the next 2 days and why it is so important. So with that, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that today would not be possible without our sponsors. So thank you so much to Genentech, Pfizer, and Bristol Myers Squibb for your support in making this Advocacy Summit possible. We believe that this year's summit is more important than ever, and we do appreciate the support. So what are we going to learn? So you've seen the agendas, but I want to remind you what we're covering today and what we'll be covering tomorrow, because we really were thoughtful about putting this agenda together. And as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about LCI, but then we're going to hear about how to use your story, how to really be an effective advocate based on your own experience, no matter what that may be. And then we're going to kind of shift our focus a little bit and talk about how we can be more effective in advocating for research funding. It's a question that we've heard a lot from you all, and it's certainly something we want to arm you with some tools and some message points. And then we're going to talk about disparities in lung cancer, and we have a really good panel discussion for that. And then at the end of today, we're going to break out in some different networking groups. So you'll have a chance to talk to some other folks, and we do encourage you to stick around for that. Tomorrow, we'll shift gears, and we're going to look more at a Lung Cancer 101, and we're going to hear from some of the physicians and the leaders in our network. And then we're going to talk about treatment updates and personalized medicine, and then specifically focus on biomarker testing. And at the end of tomorrow, we're going to try to pull everything together and talk to you about how you can get involved and what you can do in your own communities. So a little bit about LCI. Our mission is to save lives and provide support to those affected by lung cancer through research, awareness, education, and access programs. We are the state's leading nonprofit organization supporting lung cancer research and education, and we really specialize in connecting patients and their loved ones with the medical and research community. And that's with events like today and some of the other things that I'm going to share in just a moment. We also are good stewards of our funds, and we have quite a few fundraising events that really help support a lot of the LCI's programs. So very, very quickly, just to give a high-level summary of some of our programs, we do have a lot of programming and research. We fund research fellows at the 5 major medical institutions across North Carolina. We also have a newer Innovation in Lung Cancer Research Award, and actually our RFP is out for that right now. It's open until the end of this month. We also have Career Development Awards, so larger awards to researchers who are more mid-career. In addition, we have a host of education and awareness events. So events like today are very, very important. We also have our community education series called the Power Up series that we do in partnership with different cancer centers and in communities across our state. We also have free online educational materials. We also provide physician education in specific communities. And we also work to partner with local media and publications to get awareness information out. Some of our events, such as our Lunge Forward 5K series, which we'll talk about tomorrow, you'll hear more about those, and our Evening of Hope Gala, they also help raise awareness in key communities across North Carolina. Then we also have survivor engagement and patient support programs, and these continue to grow, and we really lean on folks in our network to let us know what needs are greatest. And we have developed a new survivor steering committee. Some of those folks are actually on our call today. They're really helping us evaluate programs where we can impact survivors. And we have our gas card program where we support access to appropriate care and treatment, and also have access grants where we partner with community institutions who are doing something to facilitate access to treatment, screening, or testing, and clinical research. This year, we also launched a patient emergency fund to support patients during this unprecedented time during COVID-19. And we do hope to continue those types of programs into the future. We also have a new survivor wellness retreat. This will be the third year that we've done it. This year will be online. So I do encourage folks to reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about that. We've also launched online survivors luncheons, again, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also something that we found has been very, very popular and has been a good support for survivors. So we'll hope to continue that as well. These are some of the faces of lung cancer. And again, you're here today probably because you know someone or you specifically have been impacted by lung cancer. These individuals here are tremendous advocates for the cause and very, very involved. And hopefully, I think some of them are also joining us for our summit this weekend as well. And we want you to leave the summit knowing that there is hope. And research has brought about improvements in screening and treatments for other diseases that have led to longer and better lives for patients. And now is the time for lung cancer. There are many very exciting things that we are on the cusp of, medical advancements, and we want to arm you with tools so that you can start talking about some of those things. And if we work together, we can all do the same for lung cancer. We always like to say at Lung Cancer Initiative that together there's always something that we can do, and we really believe that. So who's here? There are registered for this program 22 survivors, which is amazing. We have folks from 9 different states, and that's the beauty of being able to connect virtually. 39 cities, and total 67 participants. And I know we still had some folks still registering up till now, so we may have more than that now. Very, very exciting. We asked you all when you registered, why do you advocate? And this is just a word cloud of some of the themes that emerged, and words like believe, learn, impact, lost, love, they stand out. And many of you are here because you may have lost a loved one. Many of you are here because you are a lung cancer survivor. Folks are here because they know that there's a stigma of lung cancer and they want to help change some of the myths and misconceptions about lung cancer. So regardless of why you're here, I hope that you will leave tomorrow knowing how your experience and your story can make you a better advocate. And we're here to build a movement. Many of you know there's too many people that can't speak for themselves, and that's what we're here for. And we can't make progress without the research, the education, and the awareness about the disease of lung cancer. So we need everyone. We need you advocating for more research dollars and researchers in the field. And so what are we asking of you? We're asking you to attend as many sessions as you can. I know with a virtual environment it's difficult, but we have a really good lineup. We ask you to please listen and please contribute your questions, your ideas and perspectives, because that's going to make this a richer experience as if you contribute as well. And please do respect others that have different viewpoints from your own as well. And with that, I am going to take us right into our first presentation with our keynote presenter, Sharon Delaney-McLeod. And she's going to talk about building your resilience to be the best you. Sharon is an Emmy award-winning broadcaster, a TEDx speaker, certified diversity executive, agency owner, Olympic torchbearer, and author who helps leaders and teams improve communication and build resilience to drive business results. Through her professional development practice at Walk West, a full-service marketing agency, Sharon works with C-suite executives and emerging leaders at global organizations on developing their message and delivering it with confidence and impact. And prior to launching her own company, Sharon spent 20 years as a television journalist, covering everything from NASA to politics to the Super Bowl at stations across the country. She has been featured in numerous publications, including Sheryl Sandberg's Option B digital platform, Enterprising Women, Thrive Global, and as a co-author of the book Keep Going, Memoirs of Strength, Courage, and Perseverance. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Sharon. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Thank you so much, Paige. Lovely introduction. And I'm so glad to see all of you today. And boy, don't we all wish we could be together in Greensboro in person. Sorry that's not happening, but we are going to provide great programming for you today and tomorrow. Paige and her team have worked endlessly to be able to create this event that's going to arm you with that information that you need to be a better caretaker, a better patient, a better advocate for yourself. And so I'm really delighted to be a part of the program today. I'm going to share my screen with you right now. Let's see, here we go. And I'll just double check that you all can see it. If you could give me a thumbs up. Great, okay, let me get the slideshow in full view. And you can also, keep me as a little box on the side too. Today, what we want to talk about, and we hear this term resilience a lot, but I know that all of you who are in this lung cancer world, whether it's as a patient, survivor, caretaker, clinician, you have to have resilience. And whether it feels like it or not, each day that you wake up and face this journey, you are building that resilience a little bit more each and every day. And it's kind of like muscle memory. Now, I'm not saying I don't have it figured all out myself. There are days that I wake up and I think, how in the world can we get up and give our best today? And sometimes it is harder on some days than others. And in this new reality, it is imperative that we give ourselves grace. We give grace to those taking care of us, and the clinicians, staff at facilities where you might be getting your care, that spouse or partner who's helping. We just have to be able to find more patience and grace with that. So I'm going to get us started because I have some experience in the cancer world. And even though it wasn't lung cancer, I think some of the same feelings and approaches to care are very ubiquitous across the board. The number one thing I want all of us to recognize today is that we have to be our best advocate, or what I like to say, we need to be the CEO of our own health. And for a patient, that means learning, reading, gaining knowledge as much as you can. If you're a caregiver, same thing. You need to learn everything you can about the disease to be able to give the most for the person you're caring for. Ask questions. Don't just take whatever information you're given. As the CEO of your own health, it is imperative that we do that. So I'd love to get some reaction. Who feels like this nowadays? All right, if you're not raising your hand, I want to be wherever you are. So what this video is demonstrating is that on top of the water, like these baby chicks, we might be all kind of put together, and we might be managing and looking to the outside world that we've got our act together. But down below the water, our little feet are going 5,000 miles per hour. I feel like that a lot. And especially, I think you all can probably resonate with this, and we all feel like this often. So sometimes you have to take a step back. I like to use a little humor when I'm faced with some tough days. And I believe we all should have a meme. On social media, on all the socials, especially on Instagram and the chats, the Snapchats, and all the TikToks and the Facebooks and everything. I think that this represents my meme. I want to be the swizzle stick in the cup of life. And so this represents, in the front, I may look like all this put together with my hair and makeup just so, and my outfit, but in the back, that's really me. The inside, I'm all kinds of messy. And I think that that's where the root of this is. We can all give ourselves a little bit of grace so that you can be messy on the inside while still trying to give your best on the outside every day, and recognize that we're all trying to do this. And that is where the resiliency seeds are planted, because no one has it all figured out. If they say they do, I think they might not be as truthful as we might think. So giving ourselves that breath. And when we do that, we will find out and discover if we are going to be able to face that challenge rolled up in a ball, unable to look at it, or are we going to be able to stand up, take a deep breath, and put one more foot in front of the other. And that's what this is all about, finding the grit to be able to do that. You all already have found so much of that. But sometimes we need a reminder, and especially now in the pandemic, we're going on to our 6th month of this. And as a patient, I only have to go for my oncology appointments every 6 months. But if I were in the throes of that treatment, in and out of the hospital every week, getting chemo or radiation or facing surgery, I can only imagine just how much more challenging that is. And we recognize and have to take a breath when we look at that. I want to give you a little bit of background of my story. And I think when you're thinking about being the best you have to look back at your circle of influence, the things, the people, the experiences that make up who you are. And that helps you develop that muscle memory to face each day with more bravery and courage. So taking a look at these little pictures, on the top left isn't that a fabulous hat my mom's donning? A true 1960s couple there, my mom and dad. They were Irish immigrants who left Ireland in the late 50s to come to the United States to pursue the American dream. My father had wanted to be in aeronautics, but Aer Lingus and Ryanair didn't exist back then, so he had to come to the United States to follow his dreams. He ended up landing a job with Pan American Airways. Not sure if you all remember, those of you over 30, 40 might remember Pan Am. Anyone younger? It was a fantastic airline back in its day. And it was an international airline, and my parents were transferred from New York to Nairobi, Kenya, where I was born. And I lived there until I was 5. And one of the funny stories my parents like to share is that I was the household translator. I spoke Swahili better than I spoke English for the first 4 or 5 years of my life. And then we moved from Kenya to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So that leads me to the picture on the bottom left of the tin foil, the aluminum foil there. So I don't know about any of you all, but my parents grew up post-World War II and post-Depression era where they were taught to save everything on the verge of hoarding, right? And what this represents is the kind of culture in my household. You did not throw away aluminum foil. You cleaned it, put it away, and reused it the next day for your lunch. Kind of like Christmas morning, we weren't allowed to tear open the presents. You had to reuse it. But that is a demonstration of just how thrifty my parents were. My dad was one of those people where you did not buy it unless you had the cash to do so. And so it was that kind of thrifty, work hard, and tough ethic that we had in my household. You had to earn what you were given. On the bottom right is a picture of one of the many cool adventures my family got to participate in when I was a kid with Pan Am. We got to fly for free. So we got to have a fantastic world view. For summer break, I wasn't going to camp in the mountains. I was going to the pyramids. I had no idea how lucky I was until much later. But it was a very cool kind of experience growing up like that. And it set me up well when I was 14. My father started getting ill after Christmas dinner. And he was one of those typical guys who never went to the doctor unless his leg was falling off, right? So kind of that stereotypical guy, doesn't want to see a physician unless it's just critical. And unfortunately, when he went to the doctor finally after a lot of stomach issues, it was discovered that he not only had lung cancer, he also had bone. It had already metastasized his cancer. We then found out originated in his liver, but it had gone to his pancreas, his bones, and his lungs. And unfortunately, my father, although he underwent a very difficult treatment plan, he passed away after just 4 months. My mom was of the generation in the 60s where she was brought up to get married and have children and not work outside the home. So she didn't have a career. My brother was long gone in the Air Force. And what I discovered at age 14 was that my mom was completely dependent upon my father, who was now gone. And she didn't even know how to write a check. And so I remember looking at that thinking, I am not going to ever depend on anyone else but myself. I need to learn how to be the best advocate in every part of my life. And that led me to being a control freak. Don't know about if we have any type A personalities there who think they can control everything and everyone around them. I sure thought I could. And I really thought I was the orchestrator of my life. Anyone out there think that they are or attempt to be? And as we know, so much of life is out of our control. Look at what's happened in our country and in our world in the last 6 months. Everything we thought we could plan for has changed. We have turned upside down. It's like a complete 180 of our lives. But back then, naive and hopeful and optimistic that I could control all these things, I did my very best. And I went on to attend a performing arts high school. My mother said in high school, listen, you got to find you a scholarship because we got nothing for you. So that whole work hard mentality that my father had really instilled in us was front and center. I pounded my way through Florida State in 3 years and had my first job at a TV station by the time I was 20 years old. I was going to get to the Today Show because that's what my dad and I would sit each morning before he passed. We would watch the Today Show and he would look at Jane Pauley and say, that's going to be you one day. And that sat in the back of my mind. And I said, yes, I'm going to be that one day. I was going to the network. And so I had all these great plans. I'm going to spend a year in this market, move on. And I did do that. And along the way, I met my husband, who was, thank goodness, flexible enough with his career that he was able to follow me in my crazy television career from Tallahassee to Monroe, Louisiana, Shreveport, Louisiana, Greensboro, North Carolina, Orlando, Florida, and then to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I ended my news stint. And it was along the way that I discovered that all those people who go to the network owns your life. And if you want to have a family, good luck to that. And along the way, my husband had really wanted us to start a family. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? I'm the evening anchor. I work 2 to midnight. You travel all week. How are we going to do this? And I said, all right, well, we'll figure this out. And because I'm the orchestrator of my life, I'd like to have a boy first. And then 2.5 to 3 years later, I'd like to have my daughter. Thank you. Check. So we decided to start a family, and lo and behold, I got pregnant with my boy first. Connor was born in 2002, and I thought, look at me, aren't I the lucky one? I've got this career, I've got my husband, I'm the evening anchor, I've got my son. And then 2 years later, we said, okay, time for the girl. Let me check my plan. Boom, pregnant with my daughter. How about that? And I remember in January of 2005, really clearly in my mind, sitting in Macy, my daughter's nursery, just down the hall from where I'm standing right now, sitting in the rocking chair. It's about 11 o'clock at night, looking down at Macy, rocking her to sleep. And I remember thinking, gosh, I'm so lucky. I am so grateful. I've got my son, my daughter, my husband, a career I love. I really have it all. 6 weeks later, we brought Macy for her 6-month doctor's appointment. And I was so proud to show the pediatrician how she could sit up at 6 months, and she was starting to eat solids, and she was meeting all her milestones, and she smiled all the time, slept a lot. I thought that was remarkable because my older son hardly slept at all, but she sure slept a lot. And then I showed the doctor a bruise on her belly that we couldn't explain how it got there. We hadn't tickled her too hard, we hadn't dropped her, but there was this big bruise that would not go away. So they called in the phlebotomist who pricked Macy's heel, and it started gushing blood all over the floor of the pediatrician's office. We were holding her leg up, putting pressure on it. Different nurses and a doctor came in and said, "Do you have any hemophiliacs in your family?" No. Out and in, out and in. Then they came and sat down and said, "We need you to call your husband, and you need to call someone who can come and drive you straight to the emergency room at the North Carolina Children's Hospital. We think that Macy might have leukemia." I said, "Leukemia? Isn't that cancer?" "Yes." "How can a 6-month-old baby get cancer?" It was unbelievable to us. So we raced out to UNC Chapel Hill and to the North Carolina Children's Hospital, where Macy started undergoing some incredibly tough treatment. First, a bunch of tests to confirm that, yes, she did indeed have acute myeloid leukemia, which is AML. In the blood cancer world, ALL is the most prevalent of the blood cancers that children typically get. And with ALL, there's been tremendous research. And now kids with ALL have an 80 to 85% success rate of beating it, thankfully, and that's due to research. Unfortunately, AML is the type of blood cancer that usually older people get, not babies. In fact, Macy was one of the youngest children they had ever treated for AML at the North Carolina Children's Hospital. The prognosis, 40% at best that Macy would beat this. But boy, oh boy, was she the poster child for resilience and strength and bravery. She was undergoing 12-hour infusions of chemotherapy. We were in the hospital for the first time for 6 weeks straight, quarantined in her room. We then got to go home for her counts to recover, and we went back for round 2. And her protocol called for 8 of these. It was going to take about 10 to 12 months to finish her treatment. After round 2 and going back to the hospital for round 3, the doctors were really amazed. They said, "We weren't sure what to expect, but she is tolerating this treatment incredibly well. And we're really hopeful." So hopeful that they actually sent the Make-A-Wish people in for a meeting to talk to us about, listen, when Macy's finished all of this, we want you to think about what you'd like to do, whether it's Disney World or whatever else you might dream of. But we feel really good about how things are going. And then when we went in for her 3rd treatment, Macy caught a little cold. And as you all know, when your counts are at 0, your ANC is an absolute 0, and you have no white blood cells to fight off infection, a simple cold can spiral into something much worse. And on August 5th, 2005, my sweet baby Macy, who was 10 months old, became an angel. At that point, the line in the sand was drawn boldly. My husband and I, from then on, have viewed life as everything before Macy died and then everything after. We did not know how we were going to put one foot in front of the next. Had it not been for our son, who was now 3 at the time, I don't think we would have gotten out of bed. When you have a loss that deep, you have to find the meaning and the reason to get out of bed. And so we had to re-examine our life and our priorities. We had to take a really close look at how we were choosing to spend our time. I walked away from my television career. I said, we have to figure out something different. There is a saying that Rose Kennedy said. It's been said, time heals all wounds. I do not agree. The wounds remain. In time, the mind, protecting its sanity, covers them with scar tissue and the pain lessens, but it is never gone. Moving through, not moving on. That's something that all of us really need to put into our language. When someone faces such grief, you never move on from it. You move through because you have to find a new way to live. And in fact, when you're given a diagnosis like lung cancer, that is so devastating. There is grief associated with the diagnosis, but you can't move on from it. You have to move through it and find your new way to live. As a caregiver, it's the same thing. The hopes and dreams that you have for your family change when you get a lung cancer diagnosis. So finding those new ways to move through it. I want to show you two pictures of what our family has looked like over the years. In 2005, on the left, you'll see the picture with my sweet baby Macy on my lap and Connor and my husband, Mike. In 2008, we were lucky enough to have another baby. Baby Pierce, who's now 12, almost 13. But he is a miracle. And let me tell you, there's a piece of Macy in him. There is no mistaking about it, no coincidence that he reminds us every day. No way does he replace our sweet Macy. In fact, he amplifies the short time that we had with her right here. And so as we look to live this new life, there's a space that I like to call the sacred space. I did not make this up. This actually comes from a friend of mine, Becky, who is a grief expert. And the sacred space is that part of your life where the joy that was lost because of a loss or grief, then something new comes along that you want to be joyful for, like my baby Pierce. We are so grateful to have our Pierce, but we wouldn't have him had we not lost Macy. It is that really difficult place in limbo where you're constantly on this tightrope. Think about someone like one of you survivors. When you got your diagnosis, of course it was horrific, but I am quite sure there are some new things that you've learned about yourself, that you've learned about who is your real friend, who in your family truly is there to support you. Life has a way of revealing itself when we're faced with the biggest challenges. And so while you can say you hate that you got the lung cancer, there might be some things that you can find positive about the experience. Was it you reprioritizing the way you look at life? Are you living each day at its fullest? Because you now have this, maybe it's that clock that's ticking down because we all don't know how much more time we have. This is my baby Macy, and she is such an inspiration for me every day. This picture was actually taken on her 10-month birthday, just 5 days before she passed. But her resilience, her ability to stare cancer and its horrors of treatment, the way she did that with a smile on her face was incredible. In fact, it became the joke of the cancer ward on the 5th floor at North Carolina Children's Hospital. All of the chemo made it very difficult to keep anything down eating wise. So they ended up having to put one of those tubes up her nose to feed her. And she would oftentimes, in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning. She'd stand up in her crib. She'd look at me and she'd go like this, yank. Out came the feeding tube. And then she'd dance around the crib like, you don't have me, I've got you. And it became the joke on the 5th unit, because Macy is going to challenge us, and her ability to just show such strength was incredible. I want to show you this picture of my sweet Pierce, because with the sadness that we still feel 15 years later of my Macy's passing, we also then, on the flip side of the coin, think about the gratitude. Again, this is that sacred space. How lucky we are to have our Pierce. So you can approach life each day when you wake up and think about the loss, or also think about the gains and what you are grateful for. And for me, diving in to help and volunteer and spend my time with organizations that mean so much to me has helped me heal. Doing this work with you today helps me heal. I do a lot of volunteering with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. We have had a Team Macy for years. We also spend time, money, and resources with the St. Baldrick's Foundation, which is the largest funder of pediatric cancer research money outside of the US government. People shave their heads in honor and in solidarity for kids who face cancer. And this has helped me heal. Now, my husband, he doesn't like to talk about any of it. We all face these difficult challenges differently, and that's okay. As a survivor, you might be going to the lunge runs. Your caregiver may not be as excited about it. It hurts. And it could be the reverse. Maybe your caregiver wants to do all of these things, but you want to not. And that's okay too. But have a conversation about how you want to approach these things. Now the grit part. We just have to figure that out. We have to be able to continue to put one foot in front of the other. The reason I have all this math up here is because I'm a communications major, don't like to do math, but when you start a business and you're responsible for the P&L and you're responsible for QuickBooks, wow, does your mind expand. I had to learn new things. And I was able to start a new company when I left television news. Started it with one other former newscaster, and now our company has 38 people and an office, and we have healthcare. What? We're like a big girl company, like a real thing. We even have retirement, like 401ks. What? I would have never imagined that we could have done that. And taking that risky leap away from television and trying that new thing has paid dividends. Now, did we fail every day at something? Absolutely. Each and every day we mess something up, but we keep getting up and trying again the next. And just when I thought I had a handle on all these things, boom, comes my darn diagnosis. A little over 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer that had already spread into my lymph nodes. For all you women on this summit, make sure you get a 3D mammogram. I had had 3 tumors, one of them an inch wide, that a 2D mammogram could not see because I had dense breasts. And when they put the 2D next to the 3D lit up like a Christmas tree. So I'll get off my soapbox, but please, for all the women in your lives and men, because I have 2 neighbors who have had breast cancer who are men. So please, 3D mammograms. But anyway, I had to now do this. I was like, really, God? You took my daddy, you took my daughter. My mom also has melanoma. My brother also has cancer. Both of them are doing well, thank God. I was like, serious? More cancer? But I faced it with the courage that I borrow from my Macy every single day. So that grit and gratitude is the recipe for your resilience. I have 10 steps, and I have a little handout that I'll put up in the chat. It's a PDF that you can download, so you don't have to write these down if you don't want. But these are 10 steps that we've all heard of. We all do it. but we really need to put this as a priority. Skill number 1, we've got to be brave as caregivers and as survivors and as patients. And I know you survivors, every day when you wake up with a new ache or pain or not feeling well, that whole thing in the back of your mind, is it back? Oh, I get you. I know, I'm there too. But you have to be brave and face the new day. Skill number 2, one step at a time. That is the best we can ask of ourselves right now for our caregivers, our clinicians, the nursing staff, everyone around us, family, friends, everyone. Number 3, accept help. I was terrible at accepting help for the longest time because I was that independent girl who at age 14 decided I was never going to depend on anyone else. Well, that's a crock. You have to accept help. And guess what? You can give back that help. It's a reciprocal thing. Number 4, take risks. If there is a crossroads in your life, for me, it was losing Macy that had me depart what I thought was the path forward and take a new path. And thank goodness it has paid off. Be okay with taking risks, failing, and figuring out a new way. Be flexible, like Gumby. I used to not be flexible, and my sons might tell you that I'm still not very flexible in the morning, getting us out and ready for school. I'm like a drill sergeant. However, in the grand scheme of things, we have to be flexible, especially now. Look at Paige and the whole team, what we had to do with this summit, right? You have to be flexible in today's world. Look for the good. I'm constantly having to tell myself this. We always, and with your family and your friends and your partners, one day it might be your caregiver who's down in the dumps. Then you look for the good that day and help fill their cup, and vice versa. Learn to say no. Goodness, we all have to do this. It's difficult. We want to do everything for everyone, but we can't take care of ourselves physically and mentally if we are spread so thin. You can't give your best self if you're spread so thin. Make your life a little easier. These are some of my favorite hacks. And again, I do have this in my little handout that I'll put in the chat. If you're not feeling well enough to go to the grocery store, or if you're tired of asking your neighbors or friends to constantly get groceries for you, get shipped. I've been ordering groceries ever since I was in chemo. I lay in the bed with my phone, I use the Shipped app, and I get my groceries delivered. It's okay if we have to have a frozen pizza a couple nights a week. Evernote. I can't remember anything anymore. My whole brain is on Evernote. It's a free app that allows you to put all the information. I got my health information on there, all the medicines I take. That's a great thing for a caregiver as well, because you know every time you go to the doctor, they're asking, what meds are you on? Do you take any supplements? Audible. How many of you have 10 books stacked up on their nightstand ready to read that you just can't get to? So I use Audible. Now I'm not commuting anymore, which is when I used to listen to a lot of books, but I'll walk the neighborhood. So I'll listen to podcasts and books. And then Metro's Other Woman, which is a concierge. When I was deep in the midst and throes of chemo, we got a laundry fairy to come to the house to do laundry because I just couldn't keep up when I was feeling so sick. My kids and my husband tried to do the best we could, but we got Metro's Other Woman to send someone to help us with the laundry. Just take a breath and make life a little easier. All right, number 9, make time for your friends. You have to. And if that means Zoom coffees, Zoom cocktails, I'm a big fan of that. You just have to make sure you're making time for your friends. They give you something different than your family and your partners and your caregivers do. And some of you, your friends may be your caretaker, but make time for them. And then last but not least, sleep. Oh my goodness gracious, if you are not getting proper sleep, there is no way your body and your mind can heal. Make this a priority. And I know every time I go to the oncologist, I have to fill out this thing. And one of the questions is, does your family understand that you are feeling tired? a lot. And you know what? Memory has a funny thing. I'm still on chemo meds for another 6 years. They're oral meds, but one of the side effects is they make me tired. And my husband and my kids forget that I'm still on chemo. And so they forget that I'm tired for a reason. I go to bed at 9 o'clock. They're like, oh, she goes to bed so early. She can't watch movies with us because she falls asleep. Yes. And that's okay. Sleep is important. And if you aren't getting enough or you're having trouble with sleep, seek help. Make sure you are getting the sleep that you need. So how are you going to take some of the things that we talked about today to turn your battle scars into badges of honor, to find resilience, to look for the good, and to be all about you? Because unless you turn inward and focus on building that resilience in you, there's no way you can be there for your friends and family, partners, patients, and everyone around you. Here's the little downloadable PDF. I'll add it to the chat in just a moment. You can also email me if you don't want to download it. Hit me up on any of the socials. I'll be happy to share it for you there. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and would love to take any questions if anyone has one.
Sharon, this is Paige. I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was so moving, and thank you for being so open. You know, I certainly think it makes me think about some of my experiences too. And I don't know that there's any questions in the chat yet, but something that we've heard from folks, you know, again, a lot of folks facing a diagnosis right now, but also, you know, coupling that with the isolation right now of being by yourself. And what are some things that maybe you found helpful, or things that folks can do to help build their resilience during this time when you may be alone, or you may not be able to connect with folks, even virtually? Sometimes that can be hard.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting, Paige, when the pandemic first happened, within that first 2 or 3 weeks that we were all like stay-at-home orders were across the board in North Carolina and all over the country, I remember thinking to myself, this feels like when I was in chemo. This feels an awful lot like that isolation, that you are stuck at home. You can't have visitors. You can't see anyone. You're terrified to hug anyone or do anything like that. So what I did may not be the best thing, but I think we're all pros at it now. I read a number of books. One of them that helped me not feel quite so isolated was there's a book by a woman named Chris Carr called Crazy Sexy Cancer. Sexy Crazy Cancer, Crazy Sexy Cancer. I'm trying to remember which. And it's for anybody with cancer, but it's a fun, even it's hard to imagine fun, but this woman has an incurable kind of liver cancer that there aren't even any treatments for. But she gives you new ways to look at facing treatment. And I loved looking at and reading her book. And then I joined her online community. And all those people were just like me. So that was one thing I did. A second thing, and people always ask me, oh, my such and such friend, sister, mom, brother has been diagnosed with cancer. I feel so helpless. What can I do to help? And so a couple of the things that are very practical. The food trains are one thing, but we've all gotten used to that now. Delivery is everywhere. So I think that can be helpful. Maybe once or twice a week. Don't do an onslaught of 7 meals a day. It will go to waste. But maybe reach out, and maybe you don't, if you call someone and say, how can I help? People are very shy to say they need the help. So just do it. Send the thing. Even just send a gift card. That was one of the most helpful things for me, was getting a gift card that then we could use it when we wanted to order a meal. Another thing, maybe buy someone a subscription for Netflix or Hulu. I mean, let's be real. I survived my 7 months of chemo and radiation watching a lot of Netflix. And, you know, I'd love to say I was very lofty. I wrote a book or I did this and that. No, I was too tired for any of that. But as far as the isolation, I think everybody in our country can know what it feels like to be a cancer patient right now because we've all been stuck at home. I think if you can and you have the energy, nature. Get outside, and if it just means sitting on your back porch or front porch or taking a walk, shifting your perspective, looking at something other than the four walls of your house. Just get outside. Nature heals. We know this. And you can walk outside safely and not, I think, get too close to anyone. And you can always say, hey, look, I'm immunocompromised. Please don't come near me. So those would be my tips. Crazy Sexy Cancer, Netflix subscription, and nature.
Little something for across the spectrum. Thank you. I'll check in with Colleen. Colleen, did we have any questions?
We have not received any questions, but I still encourage you all to send me any questions that you have. Although, Sharon, I have a question for you. I'm curious, you said that you're really involved with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I'm sure you have probably also advocated for breast cancer awareness as well. And I was curious if you've been able to stay connected to those communities and advocacy efforts through COVID, and if you have, what that has looked like.
Yes, with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, every spring they do a campaign called the Man and Woman of the Year campaign, which they get 10 business people, usually 10 women, 10 men, or they attempt to get that many, to raise money as fast as you can over a 10-week period, doing any kind of fundraiser you can think of. And then we usually have this big celebratory gala at the convention center with like 600 people. Well, that didn't happen this year, but we did do a virtual gala. I know you all have a virtual gala coming up, and the magnificent Ben Farrell, he was the auctioneer at that gala, and that was really helpful. So we did still connect. I'd be very curious to know how the Light the Night Walk, which is a featured and a premier event that the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society does every fall. I don't know what they're doing this year. My guess is they're going virtual. What was really difficult for the St. Baldrick's Foundation is their main bread and butter is head shavings, in-person head shavings, and the majority of those events take place in March and April. It's devastating. I mean, I have not been looking very closely to see what's happened, but I know the number of events that got canceled. It's devastating. I cannot imagine what their bottom line is. And then I know that Komen is doing their walk this year virtually in September. So people are still doing teams, and they're encouraging you to do your own walk and do an online fundraiser. It's really hard, Colleen, trying to figure out how to do all these things. There is another, the K-Yow organization. They very smartly hired a magnificent young woman named Jen Hoverstadt, who is also a breast cancer survivor. She took on a new role for them during COVID, and it's community engagement. And so she does all sorts of online community events where you can go into the Facebook page and she'll have different survivors or clinicians, different people that are engaging on the platform. So I know that's another way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Sure thing.
Colleen, I have another question if we don't have any others for participants.
Yeah, go ahead, Paige.
So Sharon, last year's summit focused on the stigma of lung cancer. And we looked at it from a lot of different angles. Some of it with the relationship with people who may smoke or have smoked. Some of it from the angle that people don't understand the newer therapies that are emerging and the research that's being done, and that some of the things that are on the horizon. Can you speak to that as far as, I think the challenge sometimes is when you're communicating with other people about lung cancer, they have a lot of preconceived notions. So as advocates, maybe some just thoughts about how to get people to listen and to take interest in what we have to say.
Absolutely. And I know that in working with the marketing committee for Lung Cancer Initiative of North Carolina, that's been one of the biggest challenges. How do you tell the story in a way that removes that stigma? And so I think, having my background nowadays is in marketing and social media and storytelling through visuals and video. I think some really strong ways would be to put a face to the lung cancer. So if you're a patient, and I know that, one of our good friends, Natalie Perkins Holden is, she's one of the healthiest people I knew. And, she exercised regularly, she ate well, she didn't smoke, and yet she still got lung cancer. And so helping to share her story almost like an influencer and taking bits and pieces of what you wouldn't expect. I know I was shocked the first time I went to the Lunge 5K. When you brought those survivors up on the stage, I could not believe how young some of those people were. And so my advice or my thinking is, if you're one of those young people and you got lung cancer out of nowhere, you could help share the story to remove that stigma, whether it's sharing your story on social media or maybe doing some writing or blogging. I think that might be a way to help plug in and to be an advocate for yourself and for the research dollars that are needed in order to find better treatments to get rid of this thing.
Thank you. Let's see, Colleen, are there any additional questions?
I don't think so. Unless if anyone has a question that you would like to ask yourself, feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, wait, I just received one from Emily Parks. Many who are diagnosed with lung cancer that use immunotherapy have fewer side effects and thereby often don't want to share their stories, but those are the stories we need. How can we convince them to share?
I guess, the side effects can be horrible. And I think the vulnerability and the authenticity is what makes its mark. And I'm curious, Emily, what kind of side effects are making some of these folks shy away from it?
Well, I'm thinking one of the people I'm thinking of in this is our mutual friend who did not have as many side effects. And so she is sometimes hesitant to share her story because she feels like there's people who have more compelling stories because they had more side effects, more things to share, whereas she is a testament to the research advancements that have been made and is people who are in these newer therapies and treatments need to share those stories that with more research funding, there are more people like me that can be survivors and have fewer side effects and live longer, better lives. But sometimes it's harder to explain to those people, we need to hear your stories just like everybody else's stories.
Absolutely. I mean, Natalie, her therapy, and I hope she's okay with me talking about this, but, she didn't lose her hair. And so she didn't have some of the same things that you might see. So people would be surprised. Oh my gosh, you have lung cancer. And I think, it just depends on the person on how private they are or are not. And so it's very individual. But if you have someone who is willing to share their story, and I think the ones who don't look like they have cancer provides that hope too, especially to the newly diagnosed. And if you look, this person's 5 years out, they're thriving. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. And it's because of these new immunotherapies and the new research and these drugs that are being pushed from clinical trials into the marketplace and are literally saving lives. That we have to try and convince some of these folks that their stories are almost more valuable, especially in the hope category.
I like that mantra of everybody's story matters.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Emily.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Colleen, I don't know that there's any other questions.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, Sharon, I just want to say thank you again. And you gave us some really good tools too. And I know you shared it in the chat, but I'm sure we'll send it out to folks afterwards too, so they'll all have it after the event. But thank you again. That was just truly inspiring. And again, thank you for being so open and sharing your story.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much, really. Thank you. And I'll share it now in the chat, but I'll also email it to you all as well. So thank you very much for letting me be part of this really important 2 days.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so now we are going to switch gears a little bit and take a deeper dive in storytelling to create empathy. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Thiede. And he's an independent content strategist, writer, and marketing consultant based in Cary. And in his business, he helps clients tell their stories to connect with their customers, employees, and other audiences to achieve their goals. He also produces and hosts the Storytelling Companion, and that's a podcast that explores the people and techniques behind storytelling. So it's my pleasure to now turn it over to Chris.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to test the audio here. Can you hear me all right? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and share with you some ideas for how you can tell your stories. We just heard a great presentation that included a really outstanding and heartfelt, emotional story. And that, I think, it dovetails really nicely into what I'm going to be sharing here with you today. Also, just before we get started, there are a couple of points. I don't have any slides or anything like that, but there are a couple of points in the presentation where I'll be asking for some participation just by chat. So get your typing fingers ready to go. Nothing too serious, no hard questions or anything like that, but looking forward to a little bit of feedback. So again, I want to thank you for having me here today. And it's kind of funny because 5 years ago, this is not, I would have never have guessed that I'd be standing, or in this case, I guess, sitting in front of you here today to talk to you about storytelling. About 5 years ago, I was working for a marketing agency, public relations agency, that was based in another city, but had a small office here in the Raleigh area. And I had been lured down to the Raleigh area to kind of take this job. It was at a cool kind of up and coming agency, and it was a chance to work with top-notch clients and do really important and fun things. And I was working with a great team of people, and it was the idea of kind of climbing the ladder a little bit, and it was and the opportunity to live in another city. I had been living in the Midwest, and it was exciting, and it was what I thought I wanted to do. But after a little while, after a couple of years, something just didn't quite feel right. I wasn't as excited to come to work every day, and I just wasn't quite hitting on all cylinders. And to be honest, it started to show a little bit in my work. Things were kind of tailing off, and just something wasn't quite right. And I wasn't happy like I thought I would be. I was getting the things that I thought I wanted in my career, but it just didn't quite feel right. And I just wasn't interested in the work. And it all kind of came to a head about 5 years ago, almost exactly 5 years ago, when I was let go. And I remember that day really, really well. The office that I worked in was a small office. We had about a half a dozen people. The agency itself that I worked for had about 100 people. And occasionally we would get people from the home office, I guess, corporate, partners and so forth, coming down to the office and just hanging out with us for a day or two, working out of our office. And the week before, the HR manager was in our office and doing just that, as was pretty normal. She would do that every couple months or so. She would come down. So I came into work that Monday, and I was there for a couple of days or a couple of hours, and I saw her walk in again, unannounced, and I knew something was up, and I was pretty sure it had to do with me. And as soon as I saw her, I ran into my office and I started uploading work samples and contacts and things like that. I had a pretty good feeling that there was going to be a job search ahead of me, and I wanted to gather as much information as I could to get ready for that. And sure enough, a couple minutes later, I got the knock on my door, and she asked me to come into the office next door, and she wanted to talk with me a little bit. And I remember that feeling pretty well, walking slowly over to the next office, and I had this kind of heavy feeling in my chest and all this uncertainty swirling around. And I just, I was pretty sure I knew what was going to happen, but I didn't, know for sure what was going to happen next. And it was just it was an awful feeling, really. And, thinking back, I mean, working in marketing agencies, getting let go every now and again is kind of a rite of passage. I mean, it's something that I had seen happen to colleagues and friends over the many years of my career prior. So, it's something that just happens every now and again. But it had never really happened to me. So I wasn't really quite prepared for it. But I walked into the office and they informed me they were letting me go. And, that was that day. And as you can imagine, that was a pretty rough day. But in hindsight and thinking forward a little bit, it was actually probably turned out to be kind of a blessing in disguise, because it really led me to go home and kind of be honest with myself and look myself in the mirror and say, was this really what I wanted to be doing? I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't happy. I knew that. And why wasn't I happy? So, what I discovered about myself was I didn't want that ladder climbing career. I didn't want to do all of that. I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to play to my strengths and do things that interested me. When I was working in a job and an opportunity came along, I couldn't necessarily follow it. But now, as an independent person, I can do that. I can do basically whatever I want. I can take off whatever I want. I can work late. I can do whatever. And so I can do what interests me. So that kind of experience really was kind of the kick in the pants that I needed to kind of shift gears and go in the direction that I wanted to. And that has led me to speaking to you here today. So that was a turning point, I guess you could say, in my career. But anyway, so what I'm here to do today is talk to you a little bit about storytelling and what it is and how you can use it to advance the goals, raise the awareness, and do the things that you need to do. And we just heard a great presentation by Sharon, and I think I'm going to refer back to that a lot. It was kind of fortuitous that that happened, because she espoused a lot of the things I'm going to be talking with you today about. So storytelling, as I'm sure you're aware, is a really powerful tool in terms of creating empathy with your audience and helping them to understand who you are, where you're coming from, what you're trying to say, and to be aware, raise the awareness of the things that you're trying to make them understand, and even to take some sort of action potentially. In my line of work, I work primarily in marketing, so I work with clients to help them raise awareness about their products or their services, and ultimately, try to sell something. But what I'm going to be talking with you today about is the idea of telling your story, your personal story, and talking about some techniques that you can use to kind of shape your narrative for maximum effect. Now, one of the things that was alluded to just a little while ago was the idea of people love stories and they love telling stories, but they don't always love telling their own story. For a lot of people, there's a natural hesitancy or shyness, or they maybe just don't even think that their story is all that unique or interesting or important. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the truth. That's not the truth. And we just heard it, that your story matters, no matter how boring you think it might be or unremarkable you think it might be. It does matter. And personal storytelling is, in a lot of ways, it's the simplest form of storytelling, because you have all of the information you need. You don't need to do any research or anything like that. Everything that you need to tell your story is already in your head and in your heart. You just need to find a way to share it with people. But it's also, that's what also makes it the hardest, because it's difficult for a lot of people, myself included, to talk about yourself and to make your own story seem interesting. So how do you do it? Well, I want to start with the most important element of personal storytelling, and think about the story that you just heard from Sharon, or the story that you heard that I shared with you at the beginning of my presentation. It was I was being a little bit sneaky there. It was kind of an icebreaker, but it's also something I'm going to be referring back to throughout this presentation. And in the comments, tell me a little bit about, this, whether it's the story that I told you or the story that you heard from Sharon. How did it affect your understanding of the speaker? How did you come to know the person a little bit? If you want to share some comments, or even just unmute yourself and shout it out. And I don't know if I can see all the, I'm seeing the chat here. I don't know if I'm seeing all the comments, but.
So if anyone wants to share in the chat, just be sure you can click on who you're sending your chat to. And if you click everyone, then we can all see it. If you want to send it directly to Chris, there's an option to do that as well.
Well, we won't take too long here, but I guess what I wanted to share about my story and about Sharon's story is the idea of being vulnerable. And that's really what makes a personal story really work well. I have to be totally honest with you. The story that I shared with you at the beginning of this presentation, I've never really told anybody before. And it was kind of tough for me to share it. Certainly, my family is aware of it and that kind of a thing, but I've never really talked about it in any kind of detail to, a broad audience like this one. But being vulnerable like that really works because it kind of instantly creates that credibility and that empathy that you want to get with your audience. Think about the people that you have the strongest relationships with in your life. They're, people like your family, your best friends, your sons and your children, your parents, people like that. Those are the people that have the fewest barriers between you and them in terms of them knowing you and that kind of thing. And that's because they know what you're all about. They know all your secrets, and they know, all your failures and your triumphs and that kind of a thing. And those are the building blocks really of great relationships. And when you're working with an audience, you also want to try to build that kind of relationship. Now, obviously it's a much shorter time period, but by making yourself vulnerable, kind of hard to say, you start to build that relationship with your audience. So I guess if you take only one thing away from this presentation here today, I want it to be that being vulnerable, while it's scary and it can be tough, it's really something that is going to help you engage with your audience. So being vulnerable is really important. And I see a comment here from Colleen. Sharon's story helped me realize that she has learned how to be resilient through heartbreaking circumstances. I couldn't have entirely understood her experience with resiliency if she wasn't willing to be so vulnerable with us. And that's exactly right. I mean, if you're not being vulnerable, if you're speaking in kind of theoreticals and generalities and so forth, you're going to have a hard time connecting with your audience. But if you're telling a personal story that's kind of in the deep, dark recesses of who you are, that makes your story that much more effective. Now, there is another element of storytelling that I wanted to share with you. And if I did a good job, you should have felt a little bit the experience of what I was going through on that day, and certainly with Sharon's story, what she went through with her daughter. Anyone care to venture a guess as to why, especially Sharon's story, because it was so great, why it was so effective beyond the vulnerability side of things? I mean, how did you feel with her as she was telling you her story?
Hey, Chris, it's Jenny. I'll just mention that I think I just immediately felt connected as being a mother myself. I mean, I was trying not to cry so much on my Zoom meeting here, but yeah, just that immediate connection I had with her. And then I'll mention too, Dusty made a note here about a similar experience with you. And I was going to say that as well with your story. I was thinking about a similar situation that I had been through as well. So with both of you, just kind of finding the points where I kind of connected with you and your story.
Great, thank you. And those are both really good points. And I think what I wanted to share about both of those is the idea of, and Joy Henderson says that she took us on a journey, her journey, and that's exactly right. And the way that you do that is through details. You really want to try to paint a picture for your audience, the listener, the reader, the watcher, whatever the medium is that you're using, as much detail as you can share with them, the more that they feel like they're there with you. You mentioned that, as a mother, you kind of have been through, what it's like to be a mother, and kind of the anxiousness that she must have felt in those days leading up to her daughter passing. And that's all true. And those details kind of add that texture to the story. And there's actually, there's a scientific reason why that happens. Researchers are really only within the last few years are starting to understand why this happens, because up until, and I don't know what the year was, but up until a few years ago, they weren't able to see the brain in real time as it receives messages. But now they have the kind of equipment that they can study the brain as people are experiencing messages and stories and so forth in real time. And what they found is, well, let me back up a little bit. In my line of work, in marketing, the temptation is, if you have a product to sell or a service to sell or something like that, the temptation is just to lay out the facts and say, okay, this is what we offer, and here's what it's going to do for you, and here's how much it costs, and here's the benefit for you, and here's how we line up against the competition, and we're better in all of these categories, and that's pretty much the end of the story. And still to this day, a lot of companies and people think that if we just kind of lay out those facts in logical fashion, people will come to the right conclusion. How could they not, right? And that's a logical thing for anybody to think. But they do come to different conclusions, and people do make different decisions. They make them based on emotions. The reason that is, scientists are finding, is that when you lay out information in just kind of logical, factual fashion, the only part of the brain that you're engaging is the part of the brain that understands language. So it's translating the numbers and the data that it hears into the concepts that you would understand. That's pretty much it. That's the only thing that happens in the brain when you kind of keep things on a very factual level. But when you tell a story and you use granular details and emotions and really good descriptions of the things that were happening, you're lighting up all of the brain, and the parts of the brain that are affected by, that have to do with the types of things that you're describing. So if you're describing an emotion of losing a child, there's a part of your brain that deals with that, and that part of the brain is lit up. If you're describing anything, really, if you're describing the taste of a lemon, or if you're describing the smell of the ocean, when you do that really well, that part of the brain kind of lights up. And as far as the brain is concerned, it's actually experiencing those things, whether or not that it is, you are actually at the beach or you are tasting a lemon, is almost beside the point. The brain thinks that that's what's happening to you. And that's really what makes your story memorable and relatable, because people have said that I could relate to Sharon as a mother because she lit up a part of your brain that has to do with those experiences, and that makes your story, her story, more relatable to you as the audience. So that's really the science behind it. Now let's talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts, I guess, of storytelling. And this is, for me, this is kind of the fun part when we talk about story structure. And luckily, Sharon's story fit very nicely into this structure idea. I think mine did as well. When you tell a story, whether it's just a minute or an hour, you want to make sure that your audience is engaged and invested in what you have to say throughout your story, and that they're with you kind of every step of the way, and that they don't lose interest. And one of the best ways to do that, aside from being vulnerable, is to have a story structure. Now, there's a lot of different approaches to this. If you do some searches on the internet, you'll find things like story arcs and hero's journey and so forth, the things that screenwriters in Hollywood might use. And that's all well and good, but I like to use a kind of a simpler format. And it really just has three main components as it relates to structuring your story. Those three components are, first is the exposition. And this is kind of the setup where you introduce the characters and the situation and kind of lay out the reality of the world before the story basically starts to happen. So, who you are, what is the situation like, and what is happening before the conflict arises. And the conflict is the second part of the structure. That's where you introduce or talk about what is it that disrupts the status quo. What are the obstacles or challenges that were presented to you or to the character, and how did you deal with them? How did you get past them? How did you rise up to meet the challenge? And then the third part is the resolution. So after the successful or maybe unsuccessful meeting of the challenge, not every story has a happy ending, and but there's still some sort of resolution. How does the character, how does the world look now after the character has gone through the challenge and either addressed it successfully, or perhaps was either triumphed or possibly defeated? Either one is a legitimate way to tell the story and can have an impact. So you think with those kind of three things in mind, think about my story at the beginning, or think about Sharon's story, and what was the exposition for me? And we won't spend time with the chat here, unless feel free to jump in if you want to share your thoughts on the chat. But for me, the exposition part obviously was, I told you about how I was working in an agency, and I was brought down here to work in this kind of cool job and climb the ladder and do all of that. Then I introduced the conflict, and I started to think, well, maybe I'm not so happy. Maybe things aren't going so well for me, and then ultimately that led to me being let go from my job. And that was kind of the climax, if you will, of the story. And then the resolution was, well, what happened was, as a result of all that, I was able to be a little bit more self-aware, or a lot more self-aware, in terms of how I view my career and how I would proceed and so forth. And I think Sharon's story had a lot of the same, had the same structure in a lot of ways, where she talked about, her life before she had kids, and how she planned everything out, and everything was going great. And then that one thing that happened when her daughter was diagnosed with leukemia, and the struggles that they went through with that, and then ultimately losing her daughter. But how did that change her? How did that change who she is, and how she goes about her life, and how she interacts with people? So that's really the structure of storytelling. And if you can think about your story in that way, and just very simply, if you're going to be telling your story on an ongoing basis, kind of outline it that way. Be kind of deliberate about it. Outline it that way so that when you're repeating your story, it becomes a little bit more natural for you. And for me, like I said, this is really kind of the fun part. I'm a little bit of a story nerd. I like when I watch movies, I kind of look for plot points and things, and I enjoy really good storytelling. And as you get into this kind of an approach, you might start to notice those kinds of things too when you're binge watching Netflix or watching a movie or reading a book or so forth. You can kind of see how the story takes shape, and you can emulate that yourself. So, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So that's really the storytelling structure that I would recommend, at least to start, and then you can start to play with it as you go. The last thing that I want to share with you before, if there are any questions, is for me, as I said before, I work in marketing where, the stories that I help my clients tell, they're important. My clients are helping people in some way or another in terms of having a little bit better life or what have you, but they're not quite as consequential, perhaps, as the types of stories that you might have to tell. I do some work a little bit with the Wake Forest School of Medicine, so it elevates it a little bit. But what I would say is that I just want to make sure that you understand that your story is really important. And this was touched on at the end of Sharon's presentation as well, that everybody has a story to tell, and they themselves might not think that it's all that interesting or all that important. But I have to tell you that people need to hear about your experiences, whatever they might be, because storytelling is more than just a way to get your message out. You really have the power to help people, to help them understand that they're not alone, or there is hope, or that they can overcome, and they can come out on the other side okay. That's really the power of storytelling to me. And I think it's almost, I hate to say it this way, but you almost have a responsibility to tell your stories. I mean, your stories, when you have the opportunity to help people, that you should really think about, and everybody's different and not everybody is comfortable telling their stories, but if you can find that strength to tell your story, you can really make an impact on people's lives. So that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for having me here again, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Chris, that was excellent, and it was great. You were right. The trajectory of having Sharon speak and then you, I mean, we kind of talked about resilience and heard Sharon's story and then heard your story and kind of the mechanics. And, I have just a lot of thoughts. And the one thing you said about the vulnerability, I was hanging on both of your every word because I saw elements of my own story and pieces of things that you were saying. And so I wanted everything that you were saying, I was just following along. And I really kind of appreciate you articulating that and the importance of that. And also what you just said about the fact that everybody's story is important. And that is just so true. And, I wonder sometimes if it's hard, Emily asked a question last session about some people may not think their story is that important. It might be hard for people to get started too and thinking about, well, what is my story? How could somebody get started and maybe even, think about what they want to do with their story. Are they trying to get folks to do something? Are they just wanting to tell their story? Do you have any guidelines for or ways people can start and then maybe even hone and refine their story?
Yeah, I think, storytelling is kind of one of those things that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And and everybody has kind of a different way that they are, that they approach, or everybody communicates differently, has different strengths when it comes to communicating. Some people are better at writing. Some people are just kind of better at talking off the cuff. I would certainly explore starting a blog if you haven't already. And even if it's for yourself, even if you don't have, make it public to the world. Starting a blog about your daily experiences and so forth. And because just the act of writing things down and kind of articulating them to yourself kind of helps you realize and helps you kind of see the best way to, or better ways perhaps to share that. And you might go so far, if you're really ambitious, you might go so far as to, start a podcast or start a YouTube channel or something like that. And don't worry about it being good. Because, whether it's a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel or anything like that, chances are if you're just starting, it's not going to be that good to start. All of us kind of go through that as content creators. But don't worry about that, because the quality of what you produce is more in your head. The quality in terms of how people perceive it is more in the value that they take from it. So, and that value comes from the stories and so forth. So, the best way to start is to start and find a way that works for you, and kind of hone it a little bit and until you kind of feel comfortable maybe sharing it in larger settings.
Thanks so much, Chris. I don't know, you probably see Paige's question in the chat box. She was wondering what the name of your podcast is.
So the name of my podcast is The Storytelling Companion. And I'll put together some notes and send it to Jenny so that she can send it to everybody later on. But it's called The Storytelling Companion. You can find it at storytellingcompanion.com. And it's also on Apple and Stitcher and Spotify and Google. You can find it those. The podcast is it's more directed at kind of corporate storytelling necessarily. And what I do is but there's a lot of common experiences that people have. And what I do is I try to find different voices from other industries of people who are good at kind of sharing their stories or some element of storytelling. They might not even realize that they're storytelling necessarily. Like an episode that's going to be coming out very shortly, I interviewed an architect, and we talked about how they see themselves as storytellers through the buildings and the spaces that they create, and how they try to create an emotional connection with people who use them. So that's just one example. Another thing I wanted to say is going back to the idea of everybody's story being important, is that you'd be surprised how many common experiences you have. Everybody thinks that when they go through something difficult or they're feeling something a certain way, that they might be the only person in the world who has felt that way, and when in reality maybe almost everybody at some level or another has gone through what you're going through. Maybe not specifically, but there's certain elements of it. So by sharing your story, you're telling people that they're not alone, and that they can get through it as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
I had another question, Chris. A lot of times in what we do, and a lot of these advocates will do, is they'll have to tell their story in a very short amount of time,
right.
Whether it be like legislatively advocating for something like Dusty's going to talk about in a minute, or just, hey, I'm doing this fundraiser because this is my story, things like that. How can they be the most effective in just like a couple minutes, or just any tips when you really have to make it brief?
Well, I think it goes back to that vulnerability again, because that's really I guess the lightning bolt, where you're offering people kind of that look into who you are, and kind of that look behind the curtain. That's again the most important thing you can do. And as you think about your story from a structural standpoint, and if you're going to be somebody who's sharing it on a regular basis, you'll kind of get good at, okay, I have this much time you know, so I can fill this much time. Or if I only have a few minutes, these are the main big points that I need to hit. You know, even if it was three sentences. So like for my story, for example, is, you know, I had a job I thought I enjoyed. I got let go, and now I'm more self-aware. I mean, that's kind of simple, but that you know, that was what, 10 seconds or so. You kind of get the idea. So
That's great. That's super helpful.
sure.
And it doesn't look like there's any additional questions. But as we said before, if you think of something, we'll be happy to share it, you know, after the fact with Chris as well and get back with you. But thank you again, Chris. That was wonderful and very practical and helpful in thinking about our stories. And love the question about doing it in a short amount of time, because that is a challenge sometimes. And thank you. And so we've heard from Sharon talking about building resilience as an advocate. We've heard from Chris about some of the tools and mechanics for how to tell our story. And now we are going to hear from Dusty Donaldson, who's going to specifically talk about how to use your story to advocate for research funding. And Dusty founded the Dusty Joy Foundation, also known as Live Lung, in 2010 and has served as executive director in a volunteer capacity for more than 10 years. Live Lung is a nonprofit charity with a mission of advancing lung cancer awareness, early detection, and compassion for people impacted by lung cancer. She's also the co-chair of the Lung Cancer Action Network, and that's an association of US-based nonprofits focusing on lung cancer, and Lung Cancer Initiative is a part of that. She serves as a research reviewer for the congressionally directed medical research program's Lung Cancer Research Program and for the American Society of Clinical Oncology's Conquer Cancer Foundation. And prior to being diagnosed with early stage lung cancer in 2005, Dusty was a journalist and a public relations professional. So it's my pleasure to now turn it over to Dusty.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. Can everyone hear me okay? Good, good. So I'm not really planning to make myself vulnerable today, but I'm just going to hopefully give you guys some tools to make you more effective using the combined skill sets that you've learned from both Sharon and Chris, which they were very powerful stories. And so hopefully this will dovetail nicely so that you'll have the ability to get us some more research funding. So one of the first things, oh, actually, I'm going to share my screen now, if I may. And go into, hopefully that's working now. Do you guys see the PowerPoint? Okay, good. So one of the first things that we learn after a lung cancer diagnosis is that there's a lack of research funding for lung cancer. I'm going to focus on the congressionally directed medical research program, and under that is the lung cancer research program, because that is the single largest funder aside from or outside of the NCI that is directed specifically for lung cancer research. So that's why I'm going to be focusing on this one. Now, my slides are, let's see, I've got people on my slides, and I'm just wondering if there's a, I just showed just the slide. Okay, we'll try that. Hopefully it's working. Paige, let me know if there's a problem, okay? Excuse me, I've got notes too. So the Department of Defense, you all know about that, and under that, the U.S. Army, and then it's under the Army, actually, is the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, or CDMRP. The CDMRP started its first program, medical research program, in 1992 with the Breast Cancer Research Program. I'm going to give you just a brief historical perspective on the CDMRP, and then we'll get down into the nuts and bolts for what we can do. Now, the lung cancer research program began in 2009, so it's been in effect for 12 years now. The first year, it was appropriated at a $20 million level. And since that year, everything has kind of gone downhill. Now, the CDMRP funds all kinds of medical research programs, from hearing loss to various different types of cancer. So this is the chart that shows the funding levels for the lung cancer research program since its founding in 2009. And as you can see, the money has gone down from 20 million to 15 million in 2010. And then for the past few years, we've had 14 million, which in the whole scheme of things for cancer research, this is not a lot of money, but it's still, you know, able to make a dent in progress in research. I want to add some perspective, however, though, because this is the first program that they started with the breast cancer research program, not to pit one cancer against another. However, it really gives you a perspective. When we're talking cancer research, this is really meaty. You've got, their very first year was in 1992, and that was funded at a $25 million level. And then it went up to 120 million, and it's been, you know, pretty much the highest it was 175 million. And this current year, it was funded at $150 million. A nice, very nice program. But this kind of gives a perspective, also a different perspective. We've got the deaths per cancer type in the black bar, and then the green is the funding for those cancers. And as you can see, there's something wrong with lung cancer, because with so many deaths and we have so little funding, so there's a real consistent disparity with funding lung cancer research program. This gives you one more chart that shows you, now these funding dollars are only since the lung cancer research program began. I did not include all the millions of dollars that were for these programs, prostate and breast, prior to the 2009 initiation of the lung cancer research program. But it just gives you another perspective that this is how that little tiny slice of pie is going to lung cancer. And not that we want to take, we don't want to take anything away from anyone else. However, if you think about it, if we were to just simply enlarge the entire pie, the disparity is still there. And so we really need to have lung cancer get a fair shot of the slice of pie. Actually, I'm going to go back to that one for just a minute, because I've got a couple of other comments I have made notes about. This pie chart really illustrates our cause, I think. And this is where your story comes in, because many of you and your loved ones have benefited from lung cancer research. The breast cancer community, the prostate cancer community, they have benefited from cancer research, and we want to get the same benefits that some of the other cancers have had. And this is the big deal. We are not going to go storming into our congressman's office or our senator's office and say, this is wrong. What we need to do is to really kind of pivot it and say, hey, the reason we really need more research funding is not necessarily because we have been the redheaded stepchild of cancer research, but because we are actually now the envy of cancer research because of all the groundbreaking research advances that are happening now with early detection, with immunotherapy, with targeted therapy. It's just mind-blowing what's happening with lung cancer. And frankly, some of the breast cancer researchers are looking at the lung cancer researchers and saying, what is happening? You guys are just exploding with cancer research. And so we really need funding for lung cancer now, which would also translate over into some of these other cancers. So, but it's your story and how lung cancer research can really extend your life, improve the quality of life for your loved ones. And that's what we need to capture. So I'm hoping to inspire you to take action, to take any frustration you might have about the lack of funding for lung cancer and turn it into something positive by, you know, impressing upon your legislators about the importance and the urgency, a sense of urgency for lung cancer research funding. And here's what we're going to do. So, you know, that original chart that I showed you when lung cancer was funded at the $20 million level. Well, some of the other organizations, mostly the GO2 Foundation for Lung Cancer, they are leading the initiatives to ask for a restoration of that $20 million. I think that's a very modest ask, and there's no reason why, you know, we can't get that restored. Now, let me just tell you where we are right now. The House has already passed our request, and they have restored the $20 million into the budget. However, it's in the Senate's hands now. And as you know, they're busy with COVID and other matters, other budget matters, but they have not acted yet. The Senate hasn't, but that's why we have an opportunity to request them to please keep it in. And let me tell you what happened last year. We were at the same place. The House passed it and recommended to the Senate to restore the $20 million to the lung cancer research program. Frankly, we thought we had it, and it was yanked out from under us. So we still got 14 million, the same as we had the previous year, but you know, we really had hoped to get that 20 million restored. So now is the time for us to take action to ask for that $20 million to be restored to the lung cancer research program by contacting our senators, Senator Burr and Senator Tom Tillis. And briefly, I just wanted to mention Chris did a beautiful job, I thought, of the three components of sharing your story, the exposition, the conflict, and the resolution. And this is what I was taught my first year when I went to Washington to advocate for cancer research funding. I was actually with the American Cancer Society and then Lung Cancer Alliance at the time. But they said hook, line, and sinker. So the hook being, who you are and, where you live, basically letting your legislator know that you are their constituent. And then the line, that's your story. That's those three components that Chris is talking about, your story, the exposition, the conflict, and the resolution. And then the sinker is the ask. We are asking for $20 million to be restored to the lung cancer research program, a very simple, straightforward ask. So a few little nuts and bolts, your story is what brings the issue to life. It's your personal story. Like Chris said, and like Sharon demonstrated, being vulnerable. Frankly, if I'm going to say it, as a lung cancer survivor myself, I am comfortable sharing this, but we don't need to know about all your radiation treatment. We don't need to know about how many, chemotherapy treatments you had, and we don't need to know. And I think it was Taylor who was talking about some of the, side effects and stuff. Frankly, they're going to glaze over. And as Paige mentioned, we only have just a couple of minutes, and so you really don't want to lose them and those details, but you do want to still make it personal, make it concise, be respectful, and thank them for their time and attention. And if you learn nothing else, please understand, most people know nothing about lung cancer. Think about before you were brought into this world. You probably knew what I knew before I was diagnosed, and that's, hey, if you smoke, you get lung cancer. If you don't, you don't. So they don't know anything. And So it's your mission to impart the urgency and the importance to fund lung cancer research and make it personal. And if you don't do it, trust me, no one will. So you're speaking for those who cannot. I want to mention one other thing. This is not the place or the time to bring politics into it, which seems kind of counterproductive, but we all have our political beliefs, especially in this divisive political environment we're in now. But you need to be able to put aside any political partisanship, be professional, courteous to everyone you communicate with, regardless of their political party. And you may be surprised to find that someone who you're talking to, probably not be speaking directly to senators, but their staffers, you might be surprised that, they might have a loved one who's going through a diagnosis at any given moment. So just be sensitive and keep it as neutral as possible. 50 ways to make a difference. And, some people can write, like Chris was talking about, and some people can send an email, that's also writing, but you can make a phone call, you can post something on social media, you can visit your senator or congressman's local office, you can visit their DC office, you can participate in an advocacy organization's event such as GoTo Foundation's Advocacy Summit, which I would highly encourage you to do. If you have never walked the halls of Congress and talk to a legislator about an issue, then you will be amazed at how empowering it is. It's like nothing else. And so I would really encourage you to do it. And usually the first time you apply to go, you can get a scholarship to cover your expenses. And I know we can't do these things right now because of COVID, but hopefully, before too terribly long, that will pass. So here's just some contact information, and I'll be happy to, send it in an email or something, or put it in the chat or something. But to contact our senators, I just put the Winston-Salem address for Senator Burr because that's that's where he lives, in Winston-Salem. And Senator Tom Tillis's Charlotte office, that's his main office. But there are offices across the state, as well as in DC. And, you can go to senate.gov for more contact options because, as Paige said, you guys are all over the state and, in fact, in other states as well. So for those who are participating in this and who are in another state, please just go to senate.gov to get your senator's contact information and ask them to, because it's for all the senators to fund the lung cancer research program, restoration of $20 million. Also, feel free to copy me on your communications or reach out to me if you have some questions or need some information. Or Elridge Proctor of GoTo Foundation for Lung Cancer. Here is her contact information. And if I've got time, I'd like to share just one other quick thing. When Chris was talking, I'm just envisioning, and Paige asked the question about what if you only have a short time, like you do when you're meeting with legislators or their staffers. And I'm thinking, I just have this vision of a potato. And like our story is a potato. And, you can do so much with a potato. It's the same story. It's the same potato, but you can, slice it or dice it. It's a mashed potato. It's hash browns. It's French fries. It's, baked potato. It's all different ways that you can use it. And you just need to be flexible, again, as Sharon was talking about, with sharing your story. And, but I would encourage you to, if you don't feel comfortable writing, use a little voice recorder on your phone. I do that a lot of times for articles that I'm writing. I'll record it and then I'll just transcribe it, and it just makes it easier for me. But try different versions and see what works in different scenarios. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you so much, Dusty. That was a great presentation. Jenny and I had the chance to call our senators and representatives a few months ago with Dusty, and it was a great experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone interested in sharing their story. I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, but I encourage you all, if you do have a question, to share it there, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask Dusty. Dusty, I did have a question for you though. I'm curious because you were saying that you've been advocating for lung cancer so long. Have things changed in terms of the types of conversations you have with members of Congress and their staff people in terms of their awareness about lung cancer, what they've learned about lung cancer, their willingness to kind of hear out and break the stigma that we talked about?
That's a great question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So one thing happened, and I can't remember now how many years ago it was, but in the beginning, it was like a brick wall. It was just a brick wall, and no one would really, I mean, well, we didn't have Chris and Sharon telling us how to share our stories. But then there was a breakthrough, and I don't know exactly when or how it happened, but I do remember that this is what I thought was really significant. One of the legislators we met with, she, right in the middle of our sharing our stories, she stopped and she said, wait, I've heard this before. She said, and I remember that what you told me, and it wasn't me, it was actually somebody from the Go-To Foundation who was with me. And she said, what you told me always stuck with me. And what they had said was, we don't have the survivors. And that's why, you know, we don't have the funding, is because we don't have the survivors to come and ask for funding. But it just clicked with her. And she said, and I've spoken up in different committee meetings I've been in. And when there's funding going for large, popular, if you will, cancers. And she says, and I said, well, what about those who have a higher death rate, higher mortality rate? You could see a difference. There was also some legislation that was passed several years ago that President Obama signed into law, and that was called the, I'm going to forget it now, but basically it brought, it told the NCI, directed them to look at models, develop scientific models to address the two highest cancers that had a mortality rate greater than 50,000, I believe, or might have been 30,000, with a mortality rate, with the high mortality rate and low funding. And at any rate, they looked at small cell lung cancer as well as pancreatic cancer. And I apologize that it's going from my mind, but if it comes to me, I'll put it in the chat what the name of it was. But that was a breakthrough that we had too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dusty. We do appreciate it. And I love the analogy of the potato, because everybody's story may look a little different, be told differently, but you can have such an impact with it, whether it's advocating for research or, as Chris said, just helping another person. So thank you so much. And thank you for some good practical tips too, for specific to advocating for research. So thank you very, very much. And now we are going to focus on disparities in lung cancer, because, you know, there's some great work being done across the state, and we really wanted to share some of the things that are being done across North Carolina with you in the hopes that maybe you'll also see some opportunities to continue to reduce the disparities that there are in lung cancer. And so I'm going to introduce our panel, and then they're each going to speak, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. Melissa Wheeler is not able to be with us here today live, so we will share her questions afterwards, and then she'll follow up with you individually. But we have a wonderful panel. Melissa Wheeler has over 20 years of experience in healthcare with a specialized focus in oncology. She's the Director of Disparities and Outreach at Levine Cancer Institute, which is a department that's dedicated to eradicating the burden of cancer in underserved communities through prevention, education, screening, and early detection of the disease. And in 2016, Melissa authored a grant proposal that resulted in $1.6 million of funding for the nation's first mobile lung cancer screening bus as a part of the Lung Bases for Life program, which was also awarded the Association for Community Cancer Centers Innovation Award last fall. Dr. Nadine Barrett is a medical sociologist with over 15 years of experience engaging diverse health systems and communities to improve community and population health. She's devoted her career to reducing health disparities among disadvantaged and vulnerable populations and effectively training healthcare and research professionals and trainees in community engagement, diversity and inclusion, and the principles of authentic and impactful stakeholder collaborations. She's the inaugural director of the Office of Health Equity and Disparities at Duke Cancer Institute and the director of the Duke Community Connections and Collaborations Core. And then Dr. Karen Winkfield is the Associate Director for Community Outreach and Engagement and the Director of the Office of Cancer Health Equity at Wake Forest Baptist Health. She's a practicing radiation oncologist whose research is focused on improving access to care for underserved populations. Dr. Winkfield believes that everyone should have the same opportunity to survive cancer and to survive it well. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Winkfield.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paige. I really appreciate the invitation. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, fantastic. And I just want to make sure you can see my slides. I've kind of put them up. Is that working okay? Perfecto. Very good. And I apologize for not being on at the beginning. I am running around in meetings, but so excited to have the invitation from the LCI and so excited to see all of you here. We're learning how to do this stuff now in the COVID era. And, you know, it really has changed the face of how we interact. I know I certainly miss being in person with folks. But let me just ask this question, and maybe you guys, do you have the hand raised? You guys know how to use your hand raise function that's on there? Let's see if we can get this to work. I tried to be interactive with this, but let's see what happens. Okay, so how many of you have had your healthcare somehow interrupted because of COVID, whether it be missed appointments, appointments that have had to be delayed, dental appointments, missed mammogram screenings, etc.? Can we see that? All right, so I'm seeing lots of hands go up and down. So what's fascinating is I think that while those of us who are advocates, those of us who are on the front line, those of us healthcare workers, even we have had disruptions in our healthcare due to COVID. Imagine what happens when you are an individual who's of lower socioeconomic status or who is somehow disenfranchised. And I must say that this COVID epidemic has really shown a spotlight on what some of these health disparities are. I want to just give a quick global overview of what health disparities are, so we're all on the same page. Let me just see if I can get this thing to work. That would be lovely. There we go. So the National Institutes of Health describes health disparities as differences in incidence, meaning number of new cases, prevalence, how many cases exist in a community, mortality, death, right, and burden of diseases. But check this out, and other adverse health conditions that exist. Oftentimes when we talk about health disparities, we're talking about disease burden, etc. And we sometimes fail to think about the health conditions that our communities face, that the individuals who are being looked at are exposed to risk factors. What are the things that they're facing? And that's an important distinction. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about today. And oftentimes we talk about them as being the social determinants of health. Many of you have heard that terminology before. Sometimes we say it and we're kind of not clear-minded in terms of what that is. But there is indeed an economic component, right? So we know that the greatest predictor of health is socioeconomic status, right? That's comprised of three different things. It's income, occupation, and education. Those three factors have the greatest impact on health. And so those of us like myself, I mean, I'm a clinician and, you know, it's hard. You say, well, I'm only responsible for about 25% of what an individual's health is, right? A lot of everything else happens outside of the context of the healthcare system. So how do we kind of impact that? I'll talk a little bit about some of the programs that my office has. But certainly environment, the neighborhood, food insecurity, that's a huge challenge here in North Carolina for some of our communities. And that social context, again, what is the environment that people find themselves in, and how does that impact their ability to access care or their willingness to access care even? Those are some important things that really need to be discussed, and we need to have a greater understanding of those in our communities. So I just wanted to share a little bit about what that looks like for our lung cancer patients. And let's think about that from a COVID perspective first. So for COVID, the social determinants of health, we know that the risk factors for COVID-19 are related to living conditions. How densely populated are people's living conditions? We know that individuals who are in poverty will sometimes be in apartment buildings. So there's people in and out. Maybe there's an elevator and there's a bunch of folks who need to press that button in the elevator that could be exposures. Maybe they're actually multi-generational family that lives in a single household dwelling. And we know that that puts individuals at increased risk for contracting and passing along COVID-19. So these are some issues, the social determinants of health, that really can impact one's, risk factors related to COVID. So same thing as work circumstances. Think about it. Individuals who are essential workers, they're not able to take time off from work. We're kind of fortunate because we can sit at home and be able to do some of these things. I'm in the office today because I was worried that my Wi-Fi was going to go out with the storms. But yeah, we have that luxury to go into the office or not, but not everyone does. And think about how that impacts healthcare. Think about how that impacts one's ability to get screening, say for lung cancer. Can they take the time off even from their job to go and get that done? And then even in this state, which I tell you, I came from Massachusetts a couple of years ago and was very spoiled in that environment because we had Romney Care before there was Obamacare. And so we had one of the lowest uninsured rates in the country. But here in North Carolina, where we have not expanded Medicaid, I've got counties where I have 20 to 30% uninsured. And that's before COVID. Imagine what it's like now. So all of those social determinants of health that increase the risk for individuals for developing COVID, similarly have that same impact when it comes to looking at cancer. We know that lung cancer is the #1 cause of cancer death in the United States. So I appreciate Dusty talking about what are the things that we can do to really get lung cancer in front of our legislators. It's important because people are dying of lung cancer. And yes, while one of the greatest risk factors for lung cancer is something that's modifiable, tobacco use, we know that probably about 20% of individuals who die from lung cancer never picked up a cigarette in their life. There are other exposures, and Dusty can talk to you about radon and other things. There might be other folks who are on the line who could talk even more about it. But we know that particularly in this region in North Carolina, where we have lots of radon exposure, that's one of them, in addition to secondhand smoke and other risk factors. So it's important for us to have this conversation about lung cancer. But we also know that not everyone has the same risk factors. I talk about cancer disparities all the time. And again, remember, it's not just about the incidence, mortality, et cetera. It's also about the social determinants. So I want you to think about that as we talk through some of this data. But even when we look at the top 4 cancers in the United States, lung, colorectal, female breast, and prostate cancer, we know that African Americans have the highest disease burden of all the groups, both in terms of incidence and mortality. The only one where the incidence is about the same is for female breast, where Black women and white women have the same incidence. But across the board, we can see that Blacks are dying of cancer at a much higher risk and dying of lung cancer at a much higher risk. What's fascinating is this New England Journal article that came out, and I believe it was about 2009 or so, actually showed that Blacks are actually more likely than other racial groups to develop lung cancer, even if they're smoking the same amount. So it's fascinating. Somebody could have a 1 pack per day, history of smoking, and that's what they do. And if a white person smokes 1 pack per day and a Black person smokes 1 pack per day, the person who's at higher risk is a Black individual. So the question is it just exposures, or is there some sort of genetic kind of component, or are there other factors, perhaps those social determinants of health, that may actually impact the risk factors? And so it's really important to make sure that we're thinking about the differences that we see in terms of race and ethnicity with respect to tobacco use and all of the other issues related to lung cancer and lung cancer outcomes. What's been interesting is that there is a difference in terms of tobacco use itself. And we know that most Blacks actually smoke menthol cigarettes. And there's been some data to suggest that while we're not 100% sure that smoking menthol puts people at increased risk for lung cancer itself, it actually does tend to open up the lung and the airways a little bit more, and perhaps that actually puts people at risk. We're still working that out. I think we've not done a good job at capturing that data when we're looking at these large databases around lung cancer to see what type of cigarette people are smoking to really get at the answer of that question. But I have some of my colleagues here at Wake Forest who are beginning to do that work. Additionally, cigarillo use is also higher amongst African Americans. But what's fascinating is that Blacks they would like to be able to stop smoking. They feel that it's socially unacceptable. Sometimes they are hiding their behaviors. But what's interesting is they're less likely than their white counterparts to actually successfully quit smoking. Could that be related to access to smoking cessation programs, et cetera? And then it's important to know that Hispanics overall have much lower smoking rates. And it certainly does vary, though, based on their ethnic background. So if they're Puerto Rican versus Cuban. And similarly, amongst African Americans, I must say that Black folks are not a monolithic population either. Have to think about individuals who may be directly from Africa or from one of the islands versus African Americans who are descendants of slaves. Big, big difference in terms of how we look at those populations. But the work that I do is not just specific to race and ethnicity. There are other disparities in lung cancer that we must think about. Our veterans have a much higher incidence of lung cancer than civilians do. And we know that cigarettes have been marketed to our veterans over and over and over again for many, many years. And so they have a much higher use rate and therefore a much higher incidence of lung cancer. Again, I already talked about the fact that lung cancer patients, there are some who've never smoked before. So again, thinking about what those risk factors might be. Certainly we know about some of the genetic components, but also other exposures like radon. Individuals who are have lower socioeconomic status also are at higher risk. But I've got to point out the rural communities. I mean, North Carolina has 100 counties. 80 of them are classified as rural. And we know that the risk factors in the rural population with respect to health are much greater. People are more likely to use tobacco products. They're much more likely to start using tobacco at a much younger age and to use it more heavily. So it's really important to understand that the disparities are not just about race and ethnicity, but the socioeconomics and also place matters. So why does place matter so much? Well, you know, it can impact the quality of services. Look, I'm a radiation oncologist. I need to be treating patients with a large linear accelerator. I cannot carry a several $1 million piece of equipment on my back. So that means that there's going to be limitations in terms of who has access to radiation therapy. Similarly, with screening, lung cancer screening, which now we have, it's really important to know that those services may not be as readily available. Same thing with tobacco cessation, et cetera. But there is this thing of culture. And again, I'm going to talk about the rural community because there is a culture of rurality. And that can impact the socialization, what people think are norms, and how that can impact their ability or even willingness to quit smoking or to improve their health behaviors in general. Again, remember, not everyone who has lung cancer is a smoker. And so that's an important thing. I like to think about risk factors, disparities along the entire cancer control continuum. And this is important to think about, particularly for this group. We can have impact on each of these particular domains. Prevention. What are we thinking about in terms of tobacco control? What are we thinking about in terms of other exposures? Are there ways that we can impact that at a legislative level or even within our own institutions or in our own communities? What are the things that we can do to talk about tobacco control, amongst other things? Physical activity is still important with respect to cancer outcomes in general. But then detection. We now have screening, as you know, low-dose CT scans for lung cancer. Are individuals able to get screening at the appropriate rates? Diagnosis and treatment. Clearly, there are some issues with respect to that. As I mentioned before, I'm going to show you some brief information from the Wake Forest Baptist Comprehensive Cancer Center to show you some of the disparities that my team has been working on. But we know that all these domains, there are disparities, whether we think about it from a race or ethnicity standpoint, or from a geography standpoint, or even from the standpoint of LGBTQ+ communities, which have a 10 times higher risk of tobacco use than any other group. So this is the map here is showing the shaded area is the Wake Forest Baptist Comprehensive Cancer's, what we call our catchment area. This is where our patients are primarily coming from. So you can see we actually have the western part of North Carolina, but also have communities in West Virginia and Virginia. And, you know, again, tobacco is so, integrated with the culture here in North Carolina and in some parts of Virginia, just because tobacco farming and, Reynolds is here, right? I mean, Winston-Salem, named after two tobacco companies. And so it's really important to understand that and understand that culture, because when you're implementing programs, you can't just kind of go in there willy-nilly. You have to be thoughtful about the communities that you're serving and, where they come from and what some of their background might be. Screening. just talked about that. What I had my team do is actually plot out where the lung cancer screening programs are. And these are the ones that have gotten the special designation. There may be other low-dose CT screening facilities in the area, but this is just in our catchment area. And look, we have huge areas where there are these gaps where there aren't the lung cancer screening sites. So it's really important to remember that screening may be an issue. Diagnosis and treatment. Here are a couple of disparities that people may not be aware of, and this is across all cancers. It's not just related to lung cancer, but African Americans are less likely to have PET CTs as part of their staging, and whether that's due to insurance or other things. I know Medicaid sometimes has an issue with getting PET scans because they do cost a little bit more, but they also have more treatment delays. And this actually shows, again, across many different cancers, but the lung cancer is the one that's in the diagonal hash, where we can see that doesn't matter if it's breast, colorectal, whatever, that, but we can tell that there are different communities who have treatment delays, and so that's an important thing to remember. Again, thinking about the entire cancer continuum. So here's my team. We have both programmatic support, but I must say I'm really proud of our population health navigation program, which uses culturally and linguistically concordant team members who go into the communities to do education, outreach, but also helps people through their cultural journey, in their cancer journey. So once they have a cancer diagnosis, my team jumps in to make sure that they have the assistance they need. And we focus on rural African American and Hispanic populations at Wake Forest. And we really rely heavily on our community advisory board. I'm looking at the time and I'm running out, but I did want to point out that one of the programs that we've really implemented is tobacco cessation. And that came actually from one of our community partners. We actually partnered with the Downtown Health Plaza here in Winston-Salem that has a very high percentage of their population that is lower socioeconomic status, very high African-American, Hispanic population. But what we found was over 40%, 40% of the patients who walked into those doors were active smokers, and over 55% of them had touched tobacco at some point in their life. But they were trying to send out like messages to the quit line and trying to get people set up. But we actually came in and did an action planning with them and realized they weren't filling out the paperwork properly, which then obviously impacted whether or not the patients got the help that they needed, number one, in terms of getting access to the quit line. But they also didn't have access to one-on-one tobacco cessation. So my team jumped in, and in addition to doing the actual tobacco cessation programming, which is a 6-week program, we also used the Smokalizer, which actually looked at CO monitoring and looked at carbon monoxide as a measure. You know, it's a surrogate, it's not perfect, but it actually can give people an objective reading to say, man, look, you've actually decreased your cigarette use by X amount, and we can see that in your CO monitoring. We now have had many, many more groups, and we've touched over 700 people with our cessation programming. We've partnered with many, many partners, community partners, including the Y. We actually have partnered with businesses as well. And there have been some really important lessons that we've learned. Yes, we can get people to decline. We find that when businesses jump in, when we have companies that say our policy is going to be no smoking at work, that really does help. And if they are willing to put forth the effort to provide the resources that their teams might need to help them stop smoking, that's where we can find the most success. So partner with folks. It's also important to know that nicotine replacement therapy, which is provided through the quit line for certain folks with certain types of insurance, that is really important. It's very instrumental in improving the quit rate. So I'm going to stop here. I think it's really important to just engage the community, make sure that the work that you're doing is really aligned with what the community needs are, and then making sure you have a good plan that meets everybody's needs. So this is our contact information, cancerequity@wakehealth.edu. Please feel free to reach out to our team if you're interested in gaining some additional information about the work that we do in the office. And I did want to point out the active work that I'm doing with my other colleagues, 2 medical oncologists, Dr. Lamar and Dr. Avery, where we actually have a podcast now where we are actively trying to get information out to the Black community where we see the highest mortality rates, and we do that through the podcast. So thank you so much for your attention.
Dr. Wingfield, thank you. That was excellent and a great groundwork, and just appreciate you giving that overview. So now we'll turn it over to Dr. Barrett.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Good to see everyone, and wonderful to be here. I think I need to share my screen. Do I have? Let me make sure. Okay, can everyone see that? Excellent, great. I see the thumbs up, so I think we're in good shape. Well, it's always a pleasure, first of all, to be able to follow behind one of my growing favorite people that we're seeing each other in all kinds of circles lately. But always great to hear her energy and her excitement and her passion about addressing health disparities and really advancing health equity. And so it's always a pleasure. And I was quite excited to know that we would get to collaborate in this space. I also love the fact that she teed me up perfectly to be able to move into my own talk. So we did not plan this per se, but I think it's just always great people who really want to make a difference in our community can always do great work together. So I'm really thrilled about that. And so I'll just go ahead and jump right in, because I think some of the key things that were highlighted was really kind of what Dr. Whitfield did a great job of giving an overview, if you will, about lung cancer, particularly as it relates to underrepresented populations, looking at health disparities. And she started to kind of touch into toward the end, if she had more time, she would have been able to give even more discussion and description really about the great work that she's been doing at Wake Forest, particularly as it relates to community engagement. And so I echo her thoughts, her perspective, most certainly, in terms of thinking about how do we collaborate, create partnerships, create collaborations with our community in such a way that really leads to the kind of change that we want to see and should see, specifically as it relates to lung cancer and health disparities specifically. So for those of you on the line who don't know me, my name is Dr. Nadine Barrett. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health here at Duke. I'm also Associate Director of Community Engagement, Stakeholder Strategy, and now we've just added and equity at the end of that title. And that's specifically because I focus on that both within the DCI as well as what we call our Clinical Translation Science Institute. So I have a dual role between the two, really focusing on creating an anti-bias, anti-racist, and equity culture and environment as it relates to outreach, education, screening, and research. So what I wanted to just really start off with is really kind of highlighting how and in what ways we've really kind of had to think about what community engagement really looks like, and specifically as it relates to addressing cancer in general, and then I'll speak more specifically about as it relates to lung cancer. And so I started the office, I've been at Duke for about 8 years, started the Office of Health Equity within the Cancer Institute. It's been a phenomenal journey leading that office, and most certainly creating it with our partners. And just as Dr. Wingfield said, really and truly aligning our partnerships, aligning our relationships, and understanding the priorities that's important to our community and to what we need to do in terms of addressing cancer is really critical. And so this is kind of how the structure of the strategy that we use and that I developed, that we continue to use around our community outreach and engagement work. And so at the bottom, if you think about it, this is a house. The foundation is always hearing the voice of our community, hearing the voice of our patients, hearing the voice of their caregivers, and understanding that that keeps us at the front end and understanding the pulse of what we can do better, what we've been doing great, and what are the things that we need to add to be more effective over time. And so this bottom part, if you think about it as a house, is a foundation, always hearing and collecting data to understand the burden, understand the need, and understand what's actually working. From there, we actually led to 3 different priority areas, and all of this was driven by our Community Advisory Council, as well as listening sessions that we did in the community to learn what was important. So we learned about community engagement and navigation. The community said, we really want navigation. We want to learn how to manage this complex cancer center and knowing what it means to have cancer. And that's across the continuum from education and screening all the way through, just as Dr. Wingfield said, to the point of end of life and survivorship, right? And so all of those pieces are critical to that. The other area is really starting to learn more about what is clinical trials and what does it mean to participate in clinical trials? What are the things I need to be concerned of? And how do I truly become not a subject in a clinical study, but a partner in a clinical study? And so really moving toward that has been a key part of that. And then the third area is ensuring that there's health disparities education and training that both happens within the institution, because we have plenty of implicit biases that play out that impact people, particularly people of color and underrepresented groups as they try to engage with with the healthcare system, but also ensuring that we do education, health disparities education in our community as well. That's critical because as we create our partnerships and as we align our priorities, we both all have to be on the same page and using the same language, understanding what is it we're trying to tackle. You can't try and tackle a problem or a storm and not know which direction it's coming from. If I think it's coming from the east and Dr. Wingfield thinks it's coming from the west as my partner, then we're both going to be going in completely different directions and neither of us are really going to be tackling this issue head on. So that was a key part of that, is also ensuring that we're all using the same language. And ultimately at the very top is really thinking about health equity. I see health equity as a social justice issue, that everyone should be able to have full access to all the appropriate services, resources that's available to anyone. Everyone should have it so that they can actually have the best optimal outcomes. And that to me is a social justice issue. And that's why, again, we focus on equity. So some of you may recognize a few faces in here. Ron Saval is one of them right there. You can see him there to the left. But what this is really is part of developing this work is really identifying how do we create a community advisory council that really reflects the diversity that exists within our community, but also not just in terms of patients and caregivers, but also in terms of organizations such as the Lung Cancer Initiative, who actually has been serving on our advisory council now. I would say Jenny's been on there, Jenny Denai, for about a good 5 years now, if not 4 or 5 years, if not more. And it's been an incredible relationship. And I'm going to give you an example of why it's so important that your stakeholders, even in your advisory board, should reflect community, patients, organizations such as Lung Cancer Initiative, other nonprofits, Department of Public Health is on there. All of that is a key part of the work that we do. This group has been working together over 7 years now since we started the office, and plays a key part in our outreach, our engagement, our research, and all the things that we do. And again, I'm going to give examples shortly about how we've been able to do this specifically around lung cancer. This is just another example, again, highlighting when we learn from the community what we know, and when we do assessments and we do focus groups and listening sessions, which is oftentimes driven by my community advisory council. So it's not what I want to do in the community, it's what the community wants to do in the community. We end up coming up with these incredible priorities and key areas that the community identifies. Most certainly, this is one where we make sure we report back to the community. So in this document, the two of them represent the same information. Actually, one of them on the right is a peer-reviewed journal article that talks about what we learned from the assessments. The other one is the community report that went out to the community. They both say the same thing, but they're modified and adapted based on the communities that we're serving. And so again, just highlighting opportunities where we can make sure that we're reaching everyone in the appropriate areas. Now I'm going to move a little bit more into how partnerships and collaborations can play a huge part in really addressing disparities in lung cancer and beyond. And so here's a grant that I actually was the lead of this grant, and it's now been published. It's called Project Place, Population Level Approaches to Cancer Elimination. Our advisory council played a huge part in helping us to identify, our goal was to get 2,000 surveys in a year. In 7 months, we got 2,315 surveys completed. And that was working with a huge network of our community partners, one of them being the Lung Cancer Initiative, who we actually came to their summit, the Lung Cancer Summit, and was actually to do surveys with the community so that we can actually identify from patients, what are the issues that's concerning to them? What are their priorities? And what are the things that we can start to do across the continuum to be able to address lung cancer, particularly across underrepresented groups, but also just in the general population. And so those types of partnerships, serving on advisory councils aren't just serving, it's serving a broad spectrum of people that are dealing with all kinds of cancers, but then you get to even hone in and become more specific by me learning from the Lung Cancer Initiative too. What are the priorities for the organization? What are the things that they actually need? And how can we create a bi-directional partnership toward addressing those issues? This is just an example of all the partners on Project Place. As you can see, the Lung Cancer Initiative is one, Department of Public Health, both Wake County and Durham County, some of our rural communities, and some of our faith organizations, including the Islamic Association of Raleigh. And so here I'm going to highlight now an example, and I know that I want to make sure that I use my time effectively here. And so again, this looks like the same picture, which it is, it's our advisory council, but to the left, I'm going to tell a story about how some amazing community partners came together toward really creating an opportunity to increase lung cancer education and awareness, particularly within the Black community, was also able to not just raise awareness, provide education that was evidence-based, which includes group and one-on-one sessions with our community members. And then third, use the lung cancer assessment that we use through the Lung Cancer Initiative to identify a person's high or level of risk for lung cancer. And then third, ultimately make referrals for smoking cessation programs. And this is all through this awesome partnership. As you see, I have the Durham County Department of Public Health, the Men's Health Council, Durham Parks and Recreation, the Lung Cancer Initiative, which was our partner through the Impact Grant, the Duke Cancer Institute Navigation Program, 2 faith-based organizations, and Black fraternities in the region. And so again, I'm going to now show how this whole group, who are actually represented on our advisory council, actually ended up all supporting each other toward addressing some key needs. So we applied for a Lung Cancer Initiative Impact Grant. And with this grant, we were able to, our goal was to reach 400 diverse people in the community and engage them in evidence-based education, group sessions, navigation to screening, and treatment when appropriate. That was our goal. As a result of that, LCI thought it was a great grant and funded it. Thank you very much. Very excited about that, we were. And through that process, our goal was to do that within 1 year. In less than a year, we were actually able to reach 600 people who were educated through lung cancer risk and screening. And as you can see here from my slides, 437 of them actually completed lung cancer risk assessment. And then you can also see here that we had about, I think it was 15, 20, or just a little shy of 30 people that actually ended up needing referrals for smoking cessation, and they actually went through smoking cessation programs. Now, the programs are ones that are at Duke. They also went through ones that were through the Department of Public Health, and that's another opportunity for why engaging diverse populations and ensuring that we have stakeholders across the region is important, because then we can make sure that we're actually not just assessing and giving education, but then we can actually plug people into the appropriate services and resources that can help them to get the care that they need. So through Lincoln Community Health Centers, which is one of our local QHCs here in Duke Primary Care, we have what we call our men's health screening program. Through this program, as you can see, we had 80 participants come through. Each of them got one-on-one. We had actually more than 80. We had about 300 people that came through. 80 of them actually went through the smoking cessation program. They went through a one-on-one education there, and 50 men were referred for smoking through the quit line through North Carolina. And they were there specifically signed people up and got them through the entire process of going through the smoking cessation program. We also partnered with 2 faith-based organizations to really create an opportunity for health promotion programming. Now, keep in mind, again, with each of these, through the project place data, remember I talked about the survey where we captured 2,315 respondents? Each of those partners actually highlighted what were the priority areas for them. And for all of them, lung cancer education and awareness was one of their priorities. And so picking out these community partners was very strategic, because that's what we learned from our data. This is who they said that their constituents wanted to learn more from. So here we had 2 faith-based organizations. It led to 224 people that actually did the lung cancer assessments. Over 320 people received lung cancer risk and screening education. Again, some of this in group and some of them one-on-one education, which are both best practices that are recommended from the National Cancer Institute. We also engaged our staff that was at a senior center. Our senior center actually asked us to provide help because many of their employees are working multiple jobs, they're highly stressed out, and they're also smoking. And so what we ended up doing is creating an opportunity here for them to be able to get education, one-on-one education while they were at work. The employer actually gave us time to work together with them, provide education, awareness, and 12 of their staff joined in through a smoking cessation program. And then last but not least is our Men's Health Council. And this is a group that has become very near and dear to my heart over the years. They are led by an awesome woman at Durham Department of Public Health, Joyce Page. She actually really had this vision of bringing Black men together and really thinking about how do we work together to improve health. Through this process, we actually hosted a workshop on a Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning. It went absolutely wonderfully. The men really pulled together as a group. And through that, 120 out of the 120 men that were reached, 79 completed lung cancer assessments, and 8 of them, after doing the assessment and recognized where they were on the spectrum, decided that they would go ahead and sign up for smoking cessation. And so they actually signed up for that through Department of Public Health. Again, all of these groups are actually represented on our advisory council, most of them, except for one of the faith-based organizations. And it was through the funding and support and the collaboration with the Lung Cancer Initiative that all of these partners were actually able to come together and make the type of difference that we want to see, and particularly as we think about advocating for health. This is a picture of the Black Men's Health Initiative, the Black Men's Health Council, of Durham County. As you can see, there's Joyce Page on this, and she's the second woman in from the left that's actually hugging one of our sheriffs of Durham County, who was also there as well. We also have a phenomenal group for the Black Men's Health Council of youth. And so the young men who are part of it actually gave a list of recommendations of ways in which we can be able to start raising awareness. So some of them, for example, had no idea that some people can get lung cancer and not ever smoke. That was a complete shock to everyone. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, but there's a stigma associated with that. And we were able to actually talk about that during the workshop to help people to recognize that there's people who are going through all kinds of experiences. And we all know that lung cancer can happen in multiple ways. They also learned about radon exposure being the second leading cause of death for lung cancer, through lung cancer. So again, we were able to educate and help people to understand what that means. We also were able to connect them to the state radon program, so they were actually able to, those who needed it, get the radon kits so they could test their radon levels in their own homes and in their own communities and get mitigation if needed as well. So again, the take-home point for all of this is that each of these members that's a member of our advisory council, some of them belong to organizations, but some of them are lay community members who just want to make a difference. And when we talk about advocating and being an advocate, addressing disparities across the cancer continuum really and truly can happen through partnerships, through our outreach, and also on the individual level, serving on advisory council groups, identifying and working toward when Ron Savell and LCI says, let's go out and advocate and go to the Capitol, join the Capitol. That's all part of advocating. So when we talk about addressing health disparities, it's really the whole picture. If we think about the places that we work and thinking about funding, funding actually helps us to create more opportunities for more grants like this so that we can really and truly make the kind of difference that we want to make and reduce disparities across the board. So as an individual, identifying ways that we can raise money to be able to give to organizations like LCI, to be able to give the grants to reach and engage the communities who are more likely to be trusted members in the community who are going to make the kind of difference that we want. And so again, just as Dr. Wingfield talked about earlier, we know that there's a wealth of disparities that exist, specifically as it relates to lung cancer. It's complex and there are nuances around it, but one of the key groups that we can always engage is engaging our community partners and bringing together our stakeholders to make a difference, to advocate for that change, and at an individual level, think about ways that we as individuals can also contribute to making that change by being advocates as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett, and thank you for talking about how community partners can come together in the Community Advisory Council, and it's just such a powerful group, and showing what that group was able to do together was amazing. And I love when you said you look to the community to see what the community wants to do in the community. So I thought that was wonderful. So thank you. We'll now hear from Melissa Wheeler.
To be with all of you here today, and I thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you a little bit about the work that Atrium Health Levine Cancer Institute's team is doing in terms of health equity and in terms of really helping to bridge the gap for underserved patients in our communities. I thought it would be helpful just to give a little bit of a background on Atrium Health and Levine Cancer Institute. We are a multi-site hospital system. We have about 60,000 different locations. We have inpatient, outpatient, rehab. We have a little bit of everything that you can imagine. So Levine Cancer Institute itself started back in 2013 under the guise of Dr. Derek Ragavan. He came on board around 2011, and in 2013 really began to grow the institute. And what started out as a single site, one floor institute that saw about 5,000 new patients a year, we are now a multi-state, 25 site cancer institute, and we see about 18,000 new cancer cases each year in the Carolinas. Our whole mission behind what we do is to really ensure that where a patient lives should not define how they fight cancer. So we are basically cancer care without walls. We bring everything that can be provided in a metropolitan area to all of our rural sites as well. So our mission as the Disparities and Outreach team is to really focus on those communities who have lacked access, those individuals who struggle with basic barriers, things like insurance, transportation, financial concerns, lack of a primary care physician. And really what our team does is we put our boots on the ground and we take our screenings, our programs, our education direct to those communities through a team of cancer program development specialists. Our whole goal and our whole focus as a team is to really eradicate those barriers that are limiting these patients from achieving successful outcomes and having the highest quality cancer care they can. In addition to hoping to reduce the burden of cancer in many of these communities, as we know, it's not equitable, the care oftentimes, and we see higher incidences and higher mortality rates in these communities. So our program really began to grow about 6.5 years ago, and we started in the mobile mammography space. So we provide, we provide education, we provide screening resources, we provide connection to care. So key to everything that we do is to ensure that not only are we finding cancer, but we're plugging in all of the key pieces that a patient might need to have that successful outcome. Based on that early success with breast cancer, we began to look at the fact that we were the tobacco belt and we had not really made headway in terms of improving lung cancer screening rates. And we really had to sit down and think about why that was. And when you look at, how patients feel about coming to a hospital, nobody wants to come and be there. And we knew that with our mobile mammography, patients were showing up. They felt comfortable. We were parking in their parking lot of their health department or their social service agency or other places where they were accessing care and support. We even park in church parking lots. So back in 2016, we as a team thought, why can't we do the same thing for lung cancer that we do for breast cancer? And why can't we build a mobile unit? Easier said than done. So I quickly discovered that in 2016, there wasn't a mobile lung cancer screening unit. One didn't exist. So after about 43 odd phone calls, I was able to reach Samsung Neurologica. And they were the first to create a mobile stroke unit. They were the first to take a CT scanner and load it in an ambulance style truck. So we knew that they were familiar with the technology that was needed, that low dose CT scanner. And basically after a conversation, they said, this is something we've been thinking about. This is something we really believe that we can do. So we partnered together and we wrote a grant to the Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation, and they funded us to build the first mobile lung cancer screening unit. Now, our whole goal with this unit was not to take it out and charge patients for screening. Our whole goal was to access those who would otherwise never achieve screening. We looked for the highest risk communities first. So the entire time that our mobile unit was being constructed, it took about 9 months to construct the unit itself. During that time, we were boots on the ground. We were in community clinics and sliding scale clinics and doctors' offices, talking to the primary care physicians, churches, community centers. We went to all the places where we thought our patients might be to educate them about the fact that we were about to roll this bus out. So after those 9 months, we're in early 2017, the bus was ready to go. Now, it's important to mention that this is really a wraparound program. We don't just screen, report results, and plug patients in. We really start with, do you have trouble getting to your medical appointments? Do you have enough food to eat? Are you able to keep your lights on? We look for those things, again, that are going to help contribute to a successful outcome for the patients. So our team assesses barriers, we do the screening, and then we heavily navigate each patient. One of the things that we know about underserved communities is oftentimes they fall through the cracks. Oftentimes, unless there is an advocate or a champion standing beside that person and helping them to really navigate a complex system, those patients may not get to the other side to a successful, positive outcome of their treatment. So the navigation team is a team of nurse program coordinators. They are on site for every screening. They typically are the first ones to call the patient and schedule them for the screening. But then they follow through and they make sure if the patient needs help accessing that first pulmonology visit, or has difficulty getting to their scan, or has difficulty really understanding the whole process, they do all the education as well. And they follow up to make sure that the resources have been plugged in. Now, in addition, we felt that it was very important, especially when we are focused on, with this program in particular, a high smoking population, we needed to include tobacco cessation therapy. We needed to include nicotine replacement therapy. So each of our individuals that comes forward is assessed for where they are now in that journey. We do offer on-site counseling. We do offer an opportunity to partake later on in the process if they like. Oftentimes, though, because they've established that relationship being there at the screening, they're open to it. And so we're able to not only do their initial visit, but we can then have their nicotine replacement therapy sent to the patient's home by the next morning. So it's really important when someone is interested in things like this that we take advantage of that open door. So nicotine replacement therapy is key to the program's success as well. We started out in just a handful of counties, but where we are today, the bus rolls into 17 different counties. We published, I guess it's been 6 months now, we published an article in The Oncologist about our first 550 patients. And in that first 550 patients, 70% of those were rural. About 20% of those were African American, 4% were Hispanic, and right around 1% were Native American. And that's very representative of our population that we see in our areas surrounding the Charlotte metropolitan region. So we knew that we were accessing folks who otherwise oftentimes don't get the care that they need. We found 12 lung cancers in the first 550 patients. About 58% of those were early stage. So our mission and what we were really trying to do, find it early and get them in for cure, was working. So we were able to also then identify patients with cardiac disease and plug them in as well. About 16% of our patients had moderate to severe coronary artery disease. About 27% had vascular disease. We did identify other cancers on those scans as well. So we were able to plug each and every one of those patients in for the resources that they needed. So the bus today, things have changed a lot. I think I say that every day, probably 100 times a day. There's pre-COVID and there's post-COVID. During the pre-COVID era, how the screening would work is we would roll up into the parking lot of where we were scheduled to be, set our levelers out, get the bus stable, pop a tent, and we were ready to go. And patients could walk up as they arrived, and we would get them screened. And oftentimes they would sit around and conversate with each other, and it was a very social and warm environment. But post-COVID, we've had to make some changes. We've had to look at how can we ensure that we are successfully and carefully screening patients and not increasing their risk of exposure. One of the things that we are learning is that underserved populations are testing at a much higher positive rate than the general population for COVID. So we had to look at how do we do this in the best way possible. The first thing that we had to do was limit the number of spots on our template. On a pre-COVID day, we could see between 40 and 50 patients. Now we see about 20 patients per day. And what that does is that allows us the time to sanitize and clean the unit and all of the equipment prior to the next patient boarding the bus. Pre-COVID, again, we would have patients sitting at tables and working through paperwork together. We've gone all digital at this point, and our team actually asks the patients to please remain in the vehicle until it's their turn for scan. We do all of the assessment at their drive-through window. But we also took advantage of a unique opportunity to provide firsthand education about the virus, knowing that that's probably not something many of this community were getting. So we provide written materials and education about what is it, how do you protect yourself, where do you get tested? We provide the list of all of the free testing sites that our system offers. We provide free masks that are washable, so our patients that are not able to afford those, they've got one that they can take home, wear, and wash daily. We provide information on social distancing. We provide information on, where to go if you suspect that you have COVID. And we also provide hand sanitizer. So, again, we really try to look outside the lens of just what our basic view of this is, which is cancer screening. We want to make sure that we're providing these communities, every layer and component of care that we can in order to keep them as healthy as we possibly can. Now, part of our screening that I didn't mention was we have a cancer program development specialist that attends each and every screening event. And that person's role is to assist with resource to community, community navigation to those resources they might need, but also to plug them into the other free screenings that we have that they might be eligible for. Chances are, if they are uninsured and they qualify for a lung cancer screening, then they more than likely will qualify for our colorectal screening or our breast cancer screening or our prostate screenings. So we plug them into upcoming events that they might be eligible for. So overall, I think right now, 3 years in, we're right around 1,200 patients. We have just added our second mobile unit to the fleet, and that will allow us to expand our research capability. We are just on the precipice of opening a study for looking at the under 55 population. The original NLST, National Lung Cancer Screening Study, looked at patients above the age of 55. But what we know from the tobacco belt is many of our individuals started smoking at a much younger age. In fact, some of our patients report smoking as early as 7, 8, and 9 years old as they were on the tobacco farms helping family. So we determined, based on just the numbers of patients that we saw that qualified with a PAC year but didn't meet the age threshold, we really needed to look at, can we do a study to change that? So we will be looking at 40 to 55, same PAC per year, 30 PAC per year history going forward. And we will really hope to inform future policy when it comes to who should be screened. We are also in the process of working up a research study for first responders, knowing that they are at a much higher risk for cancer incidence than the general population. And most of them will never get recommended for a lung cancer screening because most of them don't fit that smoking guideline. So that's something else that's coming forward in 2021. And we will also finally be looking at, in terms of research, comparing brick and mortar screening or getting screened at a facility versus mobile screening, which is more effective. What do patients prefer? What do we see in terms of what we call show up rate? Are our patients showing up to those screenings? So it's important for us not just to provide service, but to continue to research ways to provide the best possible care going forward. The end goal is, and I tell my team this all the time, the end goal is to eventually put us out of work so that nobody actually needs us anymore. So we have to be really creative in ways that we do that going forward. I will say that, COVID has thrown a curveball, but we're used to ducking and dealing with curveballs all the time. So we spent about 8 weeks on hold. And during that time, we just supported our patients, followed up with the ones who had already come through screening, offered emotional support. We did launch a temporary emergency food delivery program. So our team literally grocery shopped. We worked with the oncology dietitians to get very cancer-specific meal plans for our patients. We would load the boxes and we would drop them off at the porch for our immunocompromised patients. And so that was really helpful while our state got ready and put some safety mechanisms in place. But we are back on the road now that we have all of our safety measures in place, and we are screening actively. We have finally gotten a thumbs up that we'll be able to cross the state line, and we'll be screening soon in South Carolina as well, really focusing again on uninsured or underserved populations. So 2020 has been an interesting year, but again, I think we have a mission and we have a job to do. And as a Cancer Institute and a team that's really committed to health equity, we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep rolling.
Wonderful. We're so appreciative to Melissa, and I am sorry because I know the audio was very low on that, and we have recorded all these sessions, so it will be available afterwards, and hopefully we can help with the audio so that if you'd like to rewatch it, you'll be able to better hear her presentation. It's very encouraging to hear the possibilities of a mobile lab, as Dr. Winkfield alluded to, the large equipment, it's hard to take out into the community, and now we might have the possibility to do that. We do have a few moments for questions. Colleen, I don't know if any were submitted as of yet.
I have not received any questions so far.
Okay, well, I had one because Melissa was talking about COVID-19, and I'm curious to see what each of your perspectives are, especially at your health systems, of things you might be thinking about so that the gap doesn't continue to widen and create even further barriers and access to care due to COVID-19, due to this time. So Dr. Winkfield, I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. I think there is a lot of fear, but as you heard, even with Melissa's presentation, there are a lot of safeties in place to really protect patients. And I must say, things did shut down, right? All of the screening, et cetera. And so we've got to get the word out to people that it is safe to go back and to have these screening, because there is a huge concern that we're going to be seeing delayed presentation of cancer, et cetera. So whatever LCI, whatever our community partners, whatever our advocates can do to get the word out that we have put in the appropriate safety measures, wiping things down, the social distancing, wearing masks and goggles for some of our teams, it's really important to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Barrett, did you have anything you wanted to add? I saw you nodding.
I was in full agreement. I think that's critical. Information, letting people know that facilities are safe, that we're going through extraordinary measures to make sure that they're safe, to protect our patients first. And so I think that's incredible. And I think it's also important, just as was said, that the more we can get that information out through our respective outlets, from our community partners and community organizations, all the way through to our other programs, even health departments really kind of sharing about you can go to the hospital to get the care, or can go to the cancer center. So I'd agree.
Can I just add one thing? It's really important to meet people where they are. And I think all three of the folks who presented today have that same mindset. So you heard Melissa talk about kind of, look, people need food, we go food shopping, right? We do the same thing. We actually have a food drive that we're doing, and that's a really good way to give people information about other things, right? So, but if they're hungry, they're not going to hear you when you talk about lung cancer screening. If they're hungry, they're not going to hear you when you talk about, going to get their treatment, et cetera. So, it's really important to understand the community, to hear from the community and know exactly what their needs are so we can meet those needs in totality.
Excellent. And I see we have a question from Paige Black. Will low-dose CT screening be available for people who would typically be considered low risk?
So give me an example. I mean, I think we have to follow the guidelines, because payment is, for the low-dose screening is going to have to follow the guidelines. I must say the guidelines are hopefully going to change soon. I know I'm actually the co-chair of the A4C, the Advisory Committee on Cancer Coordination and Control, with Dr. Steve Paterno at Duke. And, that's really huge legislation that we're trying to get passed through, is actually to lower the age. And so you heard Melissa talk about how they're testing out kind of lowering the age, but there's cost associated with it. So my program, I can't in good faith go and tell people, hey, go and get, you know, colorectal cancer screening or go and get XYZ screening if we don't have a way to pay for it. So it's really important to make sure that if somebody is outside of the guidelines that are currently on the books, you have to, if you have money to pay for them to get the screening, that's fine, but it's not just about the screening, it's about what happens next. If they have a nodule, what happens next? Do they have the insurance to cover it? So you've got to think about that. But definitely from my perspective, I'm very cautious about who I recommend the screening to. They have to fit the guidelines, and then I also try to do an assessment of what their particular needs are, and can I help facilitate them getting the testing, which includes coverage of the exam and then follow-up.
Thanks, Dr. Wingfield. And I would be curious to hear Melissa's answer to that question in terms of how they're paying for expanding the screening for the mobile clinic. So we can get in touch with her, and we'll be sharing information afterwards, and I'll share her answer to that question as well. So Susan Smith asked, how about screening for the children of lung cancer, I'm assuming lung cancer patients, as non-smokers? So I guess this is probably a question about genetics and lung cancer, if you would like to speak to that.
So it's probably more about exposure, right? So again, we know that a lot of the individuals, majority of individuals who have lung cancer who have been never smokers may have had somebody in their family who is a smoker. So a lot of it's related to secondhand smoke. But we're even struggling with getting the people who do smoke, the active smokers, getting them covered. So right now, I don't think that there's any role for that. It would be interesting to kind of take some, we'd have to really look at the population, and that's really a population-based study to see of the people that we know who have lung cancer, how many people would need to be screened, et cetera. Remember, screening is really based on the number needed to treat, and it's a risk benefit. And so those are conversations, though, that individuals who do feel they're at very high risk can have those conversations with their doctor and then figure out if there might be an opportunity to do so. That would be my answer. I don't know if Nadine, you have something different.
No, I completely concur with you. It's something that's not being done right now, but most certainly it would require its own study if we were to really get to that point where our task force would actually approve that. And if the task force is not approving it, then you're not going to have insurance coverage for it. And so that's how that story kind of goes downstream. So I would totally agree.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Dr. Barrett. Well, I think those are all the questions I see in the chat. And I also do know that it's about time for us to move into breakout sessions. So Jenny or Paige, do you want to help us with that transition?
Thanks, everybody. I've got to go, but it's very nice to see everybody's face, whose faces I can see, and thanks everyone for joining. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Take care. And
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. I am going to turn it over to Jenny in just a moment, but we will not be gathering back together today after we go into our breakout group. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. We have given you so much information, and if you're like me, you probably need to go process it. And we're going to give you a chance in just a minute to talk with other folks, because I know that's part of the fun of the summit is people coming together and meeting other people. So we're going to give you a chance just to process and discuss some of these things in just a moment. Just want to remind you that we'll all come back together tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we have some really, really good content. So we do encourage you to come back tomorrow, and certainly appreciate any thoughts, perspectives you have between tonight and tomorrow as well.